Hello, curious people. Today I am here to help you. I know you are using this video to help you fall asleep. So before you like this video and subscribe to the channel, tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Make yourself comfortable. Now, I stepped into the stories. I'm not sure how smart giving out personal information is after something I thought could only happen in movies actually happened. But I'm scared about what this all could mean, and I want people to hear and know about this. If something happens to me, I assure you, I am no on medication, suffer from no mental illnesses, and have no trauma of any kind, and anything else you might think of. I am a completely average person living a completely average life. Well, I was, I guess, up until now. My name is Marielle. I'm from a small town in Georgia where everyone knows each other, and I work as a 911 operator. My family lives in a rural town out of state, and I haven't spoken to them about this yet, out of fear that whatever's going on might somehow affect them too if I get them involved. Yesterday I began my night shift the same way I do every evening. Most of the time I get low priority calls and a few times pranks. And since I've been doing this for a few years now, I've grown quite good at discerning what's an actually concerning call. The shift was rather tame, up until I got what I thought was a prank call. 911, what's your emergency? I spoke into the phone after returning my cup of coffee back on the desk and readjusting myself. Someone's outside my house. They've been looking around my yard and windows for the past 2 minutes. It was a woman on the other end, her voice familiar ever since the first few words, but I couldn't quite place it yet. She spoke very fast. It was obvious how nervous she was about this. No surprise there. I would be too. I thought it was some friend, but I don't know this person and they look off. Okay, ma'am. Nudging my chair closer to the desk as I begin typing on the computer, I asked the lady another question in the meantime. Can you give me your address and tell me if you can see if this person is armed? Yeah, yeah. I'm the yellow house at... he... The woman continued, but I admit, I didn't listen. She had just given my house address. I stopped my fingers in the middle of writing and sighed, thinking this must be one of my friends. We're a small bunch and very mischievous towards each other, sort of out of character for our age, I must admit. But I've said numerous times how serious prank calling 911 can be for people. Who is this? You know how badly this can end for you, right? I reached for my coffee cup, rolling my eyes, and held my hand ready to hang up the call. But she continued, What? I don't get it. I'm serious. Please don't hang up. She retorted in a tone that caught me off guard. And then again, after a second, she returned to the previous, somewhat panicked attitude. I'm sorry, but this isn't a joke. Please, I'm afraid of what this person might do. Okay, ma'am. I put the cup back on the desk and was ready to prolong this call to enough of an extent to make this woman face the consequences for holding the line. What bad luck for her, I thought, to get the operator living at the exact house she decided would be her target. What's your name, and which room are you in right now? I'm Marielle. I'm looking out my bedroom window right now. They're still there. My blood started to boil. How senseless this person must be. It was obviously a friend. I raised my voice this time, warning them again about how badly they will regret their actions if they prank call again. And just as I was about to hang up, Marielle started to beg me frantically not to. For whatever reason, something inside me was telling me to listen. I decided to give her one more chance, and then I would send the police over to arrest this prank caller, and at the very least, give her a slap on the wrist. Okay, Marielle, describe the bedroom to me. What? You heard me. What color are the curtains? Is there any furniture? Lamps? Tell me what you can see. Though I've known said friends for quite a while now, none of them have ever been in my house. I prefer it that way, not because I don't trust them to enter my home, but because I've never been fond of having guests. Neither did my parents when I was little. It's something they had that has transferred over to me. There's no way this person would. Purple curtains? Double bed with a grayish cover with white lines, a wardrobe, and a small bedside table with a night lamp on it. She went on for a few seconds while I listened, completely dumbfounded. She was describing exactly how my bedroom looked. Her next words snapped me out of the confusion. Miss, why are you asking me this? There's someone outside my house. I couldn't answer her immediately. This was just so surreal. Nothing like anything I'd experienced so far in this job. I tried to keep my cool and continue talking to her normally, but I could hear the shakiness in my own voice when all I could mutter was an, "Okay, ma'am," before falling silent again and rummaged around my desk drawer to find my personal phone. My ex-husband had installed security cameras facing the front, back, and sides of our house at different angles after some people started talking about the same car driving around their homes multiple times during the day and night, but nothing ever came out of it. It didn't hurt to have the extra security measure, but I never thought I'd actually have to use it. I opened the app while this Marielle kept repeating, "Hello," but I was too preoccupied to answer. I admit my heart had dropped into my stomach at this point, and it only got worse after I opened the camera app. My bedroom window looked out of one of the sides of my house, and right beyond the wooden fence was someone pacing left and right while looking up at the house. I finally snapped back. Okay, Marielle. Okay. I'm sending a patrol car your way immediately. Excuse the holdup. I tried to regain my composure, but could still hear my words trembling as I spoke them out loud. While the person wasn't trespassing and technically not committing any crime, what puzzled me more was that I was currently completely free of any alcohol or drug influence, talking to myself, to another me. Move away from the window to make sure he doesn't see you. Do you? I paused for a moment, taking in how ridiculous the whole situation was again, and finished my question, listening intently for the answer that was about to come from the other Marielle. Not sure what I was expecting to hear. Do you have a weapon in your house you could use in case his intentions become malevolent? I mean, the only thing I can think of right now are the knives in the kitchen, and there's an old pistol, but it's in the basement, and the door to it is outside. Am I going to have to defend myself? She sounded stressed out as she asked, but I was more shocked to hear the same exact words I'd have said in response to this question. I have a pistol, and it's in the basement. The door, to which is outside. Still unable to comprehend all of this, I told Marielle, or me I guess, to check again and see where the person is, and reassured her that the patrol car is only a few minutes away from the house. Only now did I finally look around, thinking that I must be dreaming, and caught the gaze of a fellow co-worker who had his eyebrow raised. He must have been listening in to my conversation and seen me acting off, but I tried to smile to the best of my ability and nod, quickly returning my focus to my screen before I could see his reaction. "Marielle, do you see them still?" I inquired, but got no response for another few moments. She then stumbled on her words, and I could hear the door creaking open, just as my bedroom door did, and her footsteps rapidly moving from room to room, presumably looking out other windows. No, 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 he's not out there now. I don't know where he is. Oh God, did I miss him? Is he coming towards my house? She sounded like she was on the verge of a panic attack. I did my best trying to calm her down while searching for the person myself, switching between different cameras, and when I found him, saw him in the backyard with an arm raised in the middle of the air. Moments later, a rock flew towards my kitchen window, and though the cameras have no audio to them, Marielle's shriek was perfectly timed in sync with the impact. Holy shit! Holy shit! He just broke one of my windows. She yelled frantically and began raving inaudibly into the phone. Marielle, Marielle, get to your attic. Quickly. The police will be at your place soon. Use anything you find up there to block the way in, I yelled back, raising my voice loud enough to overshadow hers and to probably scare my co-workers with the sudden decibel increase. Whatever was happening, it was real. There was someone outside my house who had just broken a window, and I was in there, afraid for my life. The advice I gave her was exactly what I would have done. The attic hatch is in the middle of the hallway, leading from the living room to my bedroom. Giving her enough time to get up there and block it afterwards, considering this person had to pass through the kitchen and then through the aforementioned parts of the house. By my calculations, Marielle had enough time to get there and use all the pent-up trash and whatever else she could find to hold the hatch shut for the little time left the police needed to arrive. I could hear Marielle slam the door behind her and run down the laminated hallway towards the hatch, and then I gasped audibly as she yelled into the speaker, and the phone dropped with a loud thud, her footsteps becoming more and more distant as another, heavier set made their way faster and faster through the hallway and closer to the phone. Are you still there? Edit. I just woke up. It's 04:16. 5 minutes ago, 2 calls from someone with no caller ID woke me up, but I didn't pick up. I'm afraid for my safety. I work at a funeral home. Some of the dead bodies are smiling. For the past 2 years, I've been working as a mortician at a funeral home in a small town. I actually love it here. I listen to lots of audiobooks. My boss is great, and I don't mind the company of the dead. They're quiet, and they're not trying to sell me something, which is a lot more than I can say for most of the living. I also feel like preparing the bodies for burial is an act of respect, a service to the community, something that gives my life meaning. Without a doubt, working here was the best job I'd ever had, until we started getting the smiling corpses. I don't know when it started. Exactly 3 weeks ago, I think. Although time has been passing strangely since it all began. When it started, of course, not all the bodies were smiling. It was just 1 or 2. Then we started getting more and more of them, and everything began to spiral out of control. To be clear, yes, I know that sometimes the deceased appear to be smiling slightly, Sometimes their facial features are built that way, sort of a resting, happy face. Sometimes we even turn their lips up a little to make their faces seem more familiar, more alive, instead of the cold mask of death. But these bodies weren't smiling slightly. No, they were full on grins, stretching dead skin to the corners of their mouths. They were grotesque. The first one came on a cold, rainy day. Her name was Amber, and she was 31 years old, much younger than the bodies I usually worked with. She'd died of a sudden blood clot. As much as I liked my job, I hated dealing with the younger ones. Before I even unzipped the body bag, I was imagining the small children she may have left behind, the aging parents grieving their daughter, the friends and family mourning a life gone too soon. I extinguished the thoughts and got to work. I turned on the light, rolled the steel bed a little closer to me, and reached for the body bag's zipper. But when I unzipped her, I froze. She was smiling. Her lips were pressed tightly together, covering her teeth, and the corners of her mouth sharply curved upwards. An expression like that wouldn't just require you to move your facial muscles. It would require you to hold them like that. I quickly unzipped the rest of the bag. But she was definitely dead. Her skin was as white as marble. Her eyes were closed. Her lips were blue. What the fuck? Maybe she was somehow alive. Hands shaking, I gently touched her lips, then her cheeks. Her skin was so cold. I reached into the body bag and pulled out her bony wrist, checking for a pulse. There wasn't any. Now, if I weren't a mortician, I'd be thinking, no big deal. She died smiling, and rigor mortis set in, but I knew that was impossible. Rigor mortis takes hours. If she died smiling, her face would naturally relax into a neutral setting before everything went stiff. I stood there, my head spinning. There was no way she was alive, but there was no way she could be grinning like this, dead. Not knowing what else to do, I called my boss in. He looked just as confused as I was. Maybe she had some sort of deformity, he said, and this is her natural expression. I don't think so. The next theory was that the coroner was doing it before the bodies got to us. Maybe it was a prank, or maybe he thought he was helping us, making the bodies look a little less dead. He was a bit odd, so it wasn't out of the question. But even if he made them smile, the smile would fade before they got here. I pointed out. That kind of smile, with her lips covering her teeth like that, requires the muscles to stay flexed. Alan didn't know what to say to that, so he excused himself to call the coroner. When he came back, his expression was grim. Jack said she wasn't smiling when he was doing the autopsy. Dread flooded me, like someone had just dumped a bucket of ice water over me. So, the smile had happened. After she'd died? On the drive over from the coroner? That's impossible, I said, my voice wavering. I know. Who else had access to the body? He shook his head. No one should have had access to the body, except us, the coroner, and the drivers who delivered her. Well, fuck. We made a few more calls to police officers, medical examiners, even a few EMTs. But no one knew what we were talking about, and the body had been securely locked away after the autopsy, according to the coroner. It looked like no one had tampered with the body. So, maybe it was just something about Amber something congenital, some sort of disease or something, that her mouth turned up in a smile several hours after death. I knew it made no sense, but what else was I supposed to tell myself? That some demon had possessed her dead body and made it smile? That a Jeech? Then he turned on his heel and walked away. So that's what I did. After pacing the room a few times to calm myself down, I walked back over to the body. I positioned my index and middle fingers over the corners of her mouth and in one swift motion pushed down. Huh. Something felt different. I poked and prodded her cheeks, frowning. Usually cheeks are soft, with the cheekbones and jawbones giving them structure, but her cheeks felt firm all over, like they had their own internal structure somehow. Maybe she had work done, like fillers or Botox, I thought. I poked and prodded some more, but that only confused me further. Something just felt off about the way her bones and facial muscles were all fitting together, just underneath the skin. I called Alan back over. Does her face feel weird to you? He poked and prodded at her face as well, frowning. A little bit, he said, finally, but not abnormally. Could be plastic surgery. That's what I thought. Hey, maybe that's why she's smiling. I mean, it's possible, I guess, he replied. Then he left, and I was back to setting her features, all alone in the morgue. My fingers worked over her cold skin quickly, trying to get the whole thing over with as fast as possible. But the more I worked, the more time I spent with her, alone in this room, the more panicked I became. Suddenly, I felt dizzy. I couldn't breathe, couldn't get enough oxygen. My legs felt weak underneath me. I was on the verge of a panic attack. I stepped away from the body, forced myself to take a deep breath. Name 5 things you can see, I told myself. Cabinets, hand sanitizer, scissors, linens, and Amber's dead body. This grounding technique wasn't quite as effective when I was in the morgue room. I'd never had a panic attack here before. The bodies had never bothered me like this. I was always able to dissociate it from the person who lived in it. I was always able to convince myself it was just dead flesh, just something left behind, no different than the strands of hair and dead skin we leave behind when we're alive. But this time was different. The grotesque grin, pushing my fingers hard into her flesh, forcing her mouth to turn down. Something deep inside me snapped. I took a few more minutes to collect myself, taking in deep, calming breaths. Then I forced myself to continue working. I walked over to the cabinet, got out the clear thread, and started to sew her mouth shut. You had to. Otherwise, their mouth would loll open and look weird. I'd forgotten to do it once, and it was the only time Alan yelled at me. But as I worked on the stitches, I couldn't stop picturing Amber's grin, and I felt like there was more resistance from her lips than there should have been. Or was I imagining it? The needle slipped against my fingers, but I forced myself to keep going. Even though my heartbeat was ratcheting up again, I ran a comb through her dyed blonde hair, arranging it with my hands. I swirled a brush into pressed powder and swept across her cheeks, her forehead, her nose. I chose a nice, natural peach-colored lipstick and applied it to her lips. Then I was done. I put the final touches on her face, poking and prodding here and there, and then it was over. I stepped back and gave her a final look. Honestly, I'd done a pretty great job. Her expression was perfectly peaceful. She almost looked like she was asleep. Then I left the room to grab the pair of earrings that the family left for her. As soon as I put them in, I'd be done, and I'd never have to look at this woman ever again. I grabbed them from the office, then hurried back to the morgue. I froze. Amber was smiling again. "Alan!" I shouted. "Alan!" The floor spun underneath me. I heard Alan's footsteps behind me, quickly approaching. I was losing my balance. I stumbled over to the wall and leaned against it, trying not to fall. "I set her features," I told him. "I stitched her mouth shut, and she's grinning again." Alan stood there frozen, his mouth hanging open, his brown skin ashen. Without a word, he walked into the room, looking over her. For several seconds, he didn't say anything. "I've never seen anything like this," he said. Finally, I joined him at her side, looked down at her awful, smiling face. I noticed one of the stitches had snapped. A piece of clear thread trailed out of her mouth. It couldn't be Ben playing with us, could it?" I asked. I wished it was. With all my being, I wished this was some ridiculous prank, and not the body moving on its own. Ben was the other mortician. He was considerably younger than me, and Alan, only 21, and heavily influenced by social media. He was always filming something or talking about some TikTok challenge he'd done. It was nauseating. "I don't think so. He's supposed to be getting the other body ready. But we can check the security footage." Alan had installed security cameras in every room of the funeral home. After someone had broken, that can't happen, can it?" I asked, my voice shaking. "No, there's no way that can happen. Dead bodies move after death, on occasion. Twitching is common, caused by the release of chemicals left over in nerve endings. Decomposition can also make the body move. I'd read an article about a man whose arms had stretched straight out at his sides, weeks after death, because of decomposition. But this wasn't decomposition, because she'd been, presumably, stored properly since her death. And this wasn't a random twitch either. It was a grin. I'd read somewhere, in some inspirational article somewhere, that it took only 12 muscles to smile and many more to frown. That meant all 12 of Amber's facial muscles were working in concert, making and holding a smile. It made no sense. Alan rewound the footage, playing the footage over and over again, muttering to himself about rigor mortis and other medical jargon. But I couldn't sit there and keep watching it. Each time I saw that grin yank up again, I felt like I might vomit. I left the office and hurried back to the morgue. I wanted Amber gone, and she would be tomorrow morning when we drove her to the cemetery. Whatever this all was, it would be gone and over with by 11 a.m. tomorrow. All I had to do was set her face again, load her into one of the refrigerated cabinets, and my job was done. When I opened the door, I found Ben standing over Amber's corpse. "Whoa," he said as I walked in. "What did you do to this one?" "Nothing. She came like that." "Seriously, what's wrong with her?" "Nothing, to my knowledge. But she's smiling." "I know." He glanced back at me, obviously confused. "I don't know what's going on, okay? And neither does Alan. She looks like she's grinning, and when I set her face, She went back to grinning. Her face just does that, and we don't know why. She looks really creepy, he said with a grin, and then I saw his hand twitch towards his pocket, towards his phone. Don't you even think about taking a picture, I snapped at him. I guess to Ben, the allure of making a viral TikTok video outweighed the chances of ruining his entire career. Ben left, looking dejected. Idiot. As soon as he was gone, I forced myself to re-sew her mouth shut. Then I pushed the corners of her mouth down, hard, until she looked like she was frowning. Maybe that was my problem. Last time, maybe I needed to set her features in the complete opposite direction. I'm sure the family would be pissed to see her frowning at the funeral, but I didn't care. Then I slid her into the cabinet. As soon as the door shut, relief flooded me. It's over. I'm done. Little did I know, Amber was just the beginning. The disappearance of Stacy Moore. On April 19th, 2018, a 24-year-old woman named Stacy Moore went missing in Springdale, AR. She was last seen by witnesses getting into a white Toyota Camry after leaving a friend's apartment at approximately 10:15 p.m. In 2022, a vehicle fitting that description was spotted in the middle of a wooded area by hikers. Law enforcement was called to the scene and discovered that the vehicle appeared to be abandoned. Inside, the police found a few empty bottles of water, an empty box of saltine crackers, a small notebook, and a pen. The following is what was written in the notebook. I'm writing this in a notebook I had in my purse in order to document what has happened to me. A short while ago, my friend Tara picked me up, and we went to her apartment to hang out for a few hours. After leaving, I decided to take an Uber back to my place. At first, everything seemed fine. The Uber car pulled up next to me in the parking lot, and I climbed into the back seat. The driver was friendly and asked me how my night was going before driving off in the direction of my destination. We engaged in some small talk for a few minutes until I noticed that he had missed the exit to my apartment. When I made him aware of this, he didn't respond. He just kept driving. I told him that he needed to turn around, but he just ignored me. Feeling very uneasy, I demanded that he stop the car or I would call the police, but he just continued driving without acknowledging me. I got out my phone only to see that it was completely dead, which didn't make any sense because, last I checked, it had almost a full charge. Panicking, I tried opening the doors, but they were locked. I tried to unlock them, but I wasn't able to. Now completely terrified, I screamed at him to let me out, but he was no longer responding to me. I was crying and pleading with him to stop the car, but he just continued on. After a few more minutes of driving, we were in an isolated part of town near a wooded area. Without warning, the driver abruptly turned off of the road and into the woods. I didn't know where he was taking me, but I knew it wasn't anywhere good. I started furiously hitting the driver in an attempt to make him stop, but I almost broke my H. I tried kicking out the windows, but they wouldn't budge. Out of desperation, I stabbed the driver in the eye with my apartment key, but again, it felt like stabbing solid rock, and it didn't even scratch him. How is he like that? It doesn't make any sense. None of this makes any sense. I'm very scared, and I don't know what to do. I have no way of checking the time, but it feels like several hours have passed since I've been trapped here, and the driver still hasn't moved or said anything. I don't know if he's dead or what. I searched the car for anything that might help me escape, but all I found were a few bottles of water and a box of crackers in the passenger seat floor. I don't know for sure, but I think they were meant for me. This is all so crazy. It feels like I've been awake for over 24 hours now, and it's becoming more difficult to keep my eyes open. I'm so tired, but I'm too scared to sleep. I just want to go home. I don't know what is going to happen, but I will update with any new developments. Update 1. I ended up falling asleep, and when I woke up, I saw something frightening. The driver's head had moved. He is still sitting in the driver's seat, but his head is turned at an impossible angle and is now staring back at me. His eyes are wide open, and he has a deadpan expression on his face. It's really creepy. I tried talking to him again, but he still won't say anything. I'm so scared. I just wish somebody would come and rescue me from this nightmare. Update 2. The hours pass so slowly. I searched the car again, but aside from the crackers and water, there's nothing here. There aren't even any registration documents or anything in the glove compartment. I was able to search the Uber driver, but there was nothing in his pockets. I've tried every way I can think of to try to escape, but it's no use. The car is completely fortified and sealed tight. I'm feeling very anxious, and it's getting hard for me to stave of the creeping panic attacks. I've been spending most of the time, aside from writing, watching the woods outside the windows. I keep watching and waiting, hoping that someone will find me soon. Update 3. He's smiling now. I fell asleep again, and when I woke up, the Uber driver was smiling. He's still in the same position he was before, but now he has a creepy, overstretched grin across his face. Panicking, I kicked at his face, but once again, it felt rock solid, and he remained unscathed. I don't know what to do. I feel like I'm going crazy. 3 nights have passed since I've been here. I'm starting to feel claustrophobic, and it's taking all of my mental strength to keep myself together. I took off my jacket and put it over the driver's face, but it does little to calm my nerves. Update 4. I dozed off again. When I woke up, I saw that the Uber driver was still in the same position, but I was too afraid to remove the jacket to see if his facial expression had changed. I looked out one of the windows and almost choked with excitement when I saw the silhouettes of people standing in the distance. This was it. I was finally being rescued, I thought. In an attempt to get their attention, I screamed as loud as I could and banged my fists hard on the windows. But the people didn't move. They just remained standing in place. There are 5 of them, and they are surrounding the car. It's too dark outside for me to make out any of their features, but it seems obvious that they're not here to rescue me. I can only assume that they must be associated with the Uber driver in some way. I'm fucking terrified. What are they planning to do? It seems like every time I fall asleep, I wake up to an escalation of this horrifying situation. I'm going to try my best to stay awake as long as I can and hope that I'll be rescued before anything else happens. Update 5. I managed to stay awake through the night. It's morning now, and the people are still standing out there. I watched them all night, and they haven't moved an inch. As the daylight slowly dawned, I could make out more of their features. They're all wearing long black robes, and each one has a mask made of dead leaves covering their face. They all have their hands behind their back, as if they're trying to conceal something. Update 6. It is becoming very difficult to keep my eyes open. I'm not sure if I was hallucinating, but I could have sworn that I heard the driver speak. He spoke in a low voice that was different from how he spoke before. It sounded like he said, "Sleep." I asked him what he meant, but he didn't respond. I asked him who the people outside were, but he remained silent. I pleaded with him to talk to me and tell me what was going on, but he still wouldn't speak. The jacket remains draped over his face, and I dare not remove it for fear of what I might see. I have a bad feeling that something terrible is going to happen soon. Update 7. Despite my best efforts to stay awake, I ended up falling asleep again. When I awoke, oh no, I almost fell asleep. I have to stay awake. 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 I have to stay. If you have any information regarding the disappearance of Stacy Moore, please contact the Springdale Police Department. I'll never forget that stare. I would like to make something very clear. Here, I usually never get scared. When I say never, I truly mean never. I'm a huge fan of horror, but I never felt fear from anything in my life. Mild discomfort at most, but even that's rare. That is until what I experienced 5 minutes ago. It's 5:15 a.m., and I never felt such fear before. For context, I live with my grandma. She just turned 82 last week, and I took time off work to visit and spent time with her in Virginia. I'm 25 and work as a financial analyst in New York. She's raised me all my life, and we're extremely close. Genuinely, the sweetest woman I know. However, the incident I just experienced makes me uncomfortable. Yesterday, we were watching TV in the living room, and she was getting a little tired. My grandma is an early bird, so she usually goes to bed at 8:39 p.m. every night. Tonight was no different. As she got up from the chair she's had since I could remember, she hugged me goodnight and headed upstairs to her bedroom. I'm a night owl and usually don't go to bed until 4:35 a.m. LOL, so I chose to stay up a bit longer. A few hours pass, and I was still watching TV. However, I started hearing a faint banging sound from afar. I couldn't wrap my finger around it, but I ignored it at first. My grandma lives in the middle of the forest in a cabin, so I assumed it was an animal outside scraping for food or something. 5 minutes later, and the banging got a bit louder. The weird thing is that the bangs were consistent, if that makes any sense. IDK where it was coming from, but it certainly came from outside the house. I started getting a bit concerned when it wasn't stopping, so I went upstairs to check on Grandma. Thankfully, she was fast asleep, and all the windows were locked. By the time I made it to her bedroom, the banging had stopped, so I let it be and walked back down. It was 2 a.m. by this point, and I figured it was time to at least try to go to sleep, since I have insomnia. So I got ready and headed to the guest bedroom, which is where I slept. What felt like a few hours passed, and the banging came back. I hadn't fallen asleep yet, so I could vividly hear the moment it returned. However, this time, it was a little stranger. Not only was it much, much louder, but also, it wasn't just a banging sound. I could also hear screaming coming behind it. A what seemed to be blood-curdling scream of a person yelling for help. The longer I waited, the louder it got. Eventually, I got pissed off and got out of bed. With my phone flashlight at hand, I followed where the bangs and screaming were coming from. But suddenly, just as I had made it to the living room, it had stopped. "TJ, are you okay?" I heard. I turned around and saw my grandma standing on the other side of the hallway. "Yeah, just that I heard a lot of banging and screaming from outside," I replied. "Banging and screaming?" Grandma seemed confused. "Yeah, but maybe it was just an animal or something," I said, while dimming the phone flashlight. Although I didn't believe for a second that it was just an animal. I didn't want to make my grandma worried or cause any problems for the night. Besides, it had already stopped, so I hoped that it wouldn't come back. Grandma sighed. "Things like that happen around here sometimes. You should get some sleep, sweetie. It's late and we have plans tomorrow." I smiled. "Yes, Grandma, I will. Love you." I hugged her and went back to my room, where I eventually dozed off. I could hear my grandma turning on the TV and cooking herself breakfast as usual. The next day passed by in a flash, and nighttime came by again. I hadn't thought of what happened the night before, and just saw it as a normal day. That is, until I realized that it was 1 a.m., and my grandma was still wide awake. Not just that, but also a lot more talkative than usual too. This wouldn't have caught me off guard if it weren't for the fact that she never stayed up past 9 p.m. for the last 20 years. "Hey, Grandma," I asked, "shouldn't you go to bed? It's late for you." "Oh, sweetie, but I'm not tired," she said. "I'll go in a bit. Don't worry." It was starting to get late, even for my standards. "You should go to bed. Soon. It's getting late. I'll go now. Good night," I said. As I laid down on my bed, I closed my eyes. After what felt like 15 minutes, I heard that faint sound again. Banging. As it got louder, the blood-curdling scream followed. "What the fuck?" I muttered under my breath as I swiftly pushed the duvet off me. Grabbing my flashlight, my body tensed up as I looked at her. I could barely breathe. "What are you doing?" said my grandma, slower than before. I took a deep breath, hoping that any ounce of my body could relax enough so I could form a sentence. "I'm sorry, Grandma," I said, my voice cracking. I was curious on what the screaming was. Grandma's smile dropped instantly, and her eyes widened further. "What scream?" My body tensed again. It felt like I was getting stares from all angles. I suddenly felt something cold touch my bare feet. As I looked down, I saw what looked like blood leaking from the storage room door. Reaching to my feet, "Thomas Jr.," said my grandma, raising her voice slightly. I gulped and looked back up. "Yes?" "What scream?" she repeated, her voice deepening slightly. Only one sentence could come out of me at that moment. Maybe it was just a dream. "I'm sorry, Grandma." Her eyes widened further, although her stare only became more tense. "Go to sleep now," she said, enunciating every word. She sounded deeper than before, almost inhumane. "Yes, Grandma," I said, my body tensing up further. As I walked towards her, a sense of pressure dawned over me. Walking past her, I could feel her stare stabbing my head. Walking to my room, I closed the door and hid under the covers, checking my foot. My suspicions were correct. What I felt leaking from under the storage room door wasn't just water, it was cold blood. This event leads to me writing this down. IDK what to do. My grandma's stare, if she even was my grandma at that moment, is implanted into my brain. I feel a cold presence looming over me. I'm still shaking, hoping that the morning comes ASAP and I can forget about this. What should I do? Please. I need all the help I can get. I don't know what to do. My family doesn't remember who I am. I've been stuck in my dorm all semester, trying to keep my head above water, clawing at my face in the middle of the night as I struggle to keep my eyes glued to my computer. When finals week finished, I was eager to get the hell out of there, but I didn't receive the homecoming I was expecting, and the reality of my new situation is slowly killing me inside. I flew home the week after Christmas. Carry-on in hand, I walked into the airport lobby, expecting to see my family waiting for me, anxious to greet me after months away. But nobody was there. I stood there awkwardly, scanning the crowd of travelers, hoping to catch a glimpse of a familiar face. But the more I searched, the more disappointment built up in my chest. Clutching my phone, I stared at the screen, awaiting a text, a call, any sign that would let me know someone was coming. That sign never came. It had been about 30 minutes after deboarding when I decided to call my dad, but his number went straight to voicemail. It was odd. My dad never had his phone off. I called my mom, and after a few rings, the pre-recorded message played from the other end. The robotic voice filled me with sadness, the tone disingenuous and cold. "We're sorry, phone number can't come to the phone right now." Knowing that they would eventually call back, I took a seat in the waiting area. An hour came and went, and I was still awaiting their call. I tried Dad's phone again and perked up when the line actually rang this time. 3 rings later, my dad's throaty voice came through the speaker. "Hello? Did you forget something?" I said, annoyed. There was a pause as I heard my dad's breathing distance itself from his phone. I pictured him playfully looking at the screen, feigning confusion. His breathing returned to the speaker, and I patiently awaited the punchline. I rolled my eyes when it came. "I'm sorry. Who is this?" I should have known this was one of his pranks, and huffed my frustration through the call. "I'm at the airport. Are you coming to get me?" A second pause came, this time lingering, fermenting in the palpable tension. "I'm sorry. I think you have the wrong number." He's never known when to end a ruse. "Dad." The third pause was just as long, and only ended when I heard the jingle telling me that the call had ended. I was stunned. The lengths this man would go to, just to play his little game. When I called back, the line rang, but he didn't answer. "I'm sorry, number can't come to the phone." I angrily ended the call and dialed again. Once again, the robotic voice greeted me instantly. "I'm sorry." I was fuming. The Uber ride home was not a happy endeavor. A scowl plastered on my face the whole time, as the views of town felt sour under the ridiculous circumstances. As soon as I walked through the door, my dad would be on the floor, laughing his ass off at the minor inconvenience he caused me. It would be the highlight of his week. The car came to a stop outside our house, the familiar lettering on the mailbox bringing slight relief in the shitstorm that was my life. I was finally home, luggage in hand. I walked up to the door and gripped the knob, but when I tried turning it, it wouldn't budge. It was the last thing I needed. My fury spilled out through my knuckles as I bashed my hand on the door. Dad, open the door. I'm here. There was movement. In the window, the curtains swaying behind the blinds. Someone was watching me. From the other side, I waved, and the blinds fluttered closed. They were really outdoing themselves this time. Footsteps walked across the floor, on the other side of the walls, and stopped just on the opposite end of the door. The knob unlatched, and the door swayed on its hinges, letting out an anguished creak. Someone was peering out of the small crack, their gaze dismissive and cold. Hi, how can I help you? I was clenching my fists, the joints in my hand snapping under the pressure. Ha ha, very funny, I said, as I touched the door and tried pushing it aside. My dad's eyes panicked as the door pushed against his hands, and he fought my push with one of equal strength. Wow, wow, wow. What the fuck do you think you're doing? Taken aback by his sudden conviction, I cowered back, stepping off the welcome. Matt, I'd never heard my dad curse. He opened the door the rest of the way, revealing a wooden bat in his hand, his knuckles white with intent. His shoulders were stiff and hands shaky. He looked ready to use it, but the fear in his eyes hoped he wouldn't have to. Dad? I questioned. The quizzical look he gave me was gut-wrenching. It's me, Maya, your daughter. My mom peered over his shoulder. Honey, what's going on? When her eyes met me, she yelped. Without breaking his connection with me, my dad answered her question. This person says their name is Maya. He paused, still calculating the situation himself. Our daughter. Horror washed over my mom's expression, and the words snagged in her throat. My dad finally glanced over at her, confirming the apparent absurdity of the situation. When their eyes returned, my dad raised the bat, shoving it in my chest. Look, I don't know if you're crazy, having some kind of a psychotic breakdown, or just some stalker, but you are not Maya. You. Disgust fluctuated his voice as he eyed me up and down. Are not my daughter. The prank had long outstayed its welcome, and I fought the awkwardness with a fragile giggle, but tears began forming in my eyes. Crackling emotion accompanied the words that left my mouth. Mom, Dad, this isn't funny anymore. My dad bared his teeth, a primal display of anger, a premonition of violence. His jaw unlatched, and I saw the fury start to wallow up from his chest. But before he could say anything, a chilling voice drifted from inside the house. Dad, what's going on? She stepped up behind my mom, craning over both of them, trying to get a look at the spectacle at the door. A void formed in the center of my chest as I recognized the person standing behind my parents. It was me. It was like staring into a mirror. The blonde hair, glasses, eyes, mouth, tone of voice, an identical twin, a doppelganger, an imposter. Shock rang in my ears, and the world became distant, muted. It was as if a bomb had gone off beside me. I was woozy, fighting not to hyperventilate. The head of the bat pushed the air out of my lungs. Hey, stop looking at her like that, you freak. I had been staring at the duplicate, but wasn't sure for how long. My mom cradled her baby in her arms, protecting the girl, protecting me from myself. My dad gently placed the bat under my chin and forced my face in his direction. Look at me, you freak. If I see you around here, or near my daughter again, I will take this bat and smash your head in. Do you hear me? Too stunned to say anything, I just stared at him. The bat shoved me back a few feet. Do you hear me? He growled. My mom held him back. Honey, that's enough. My dad lowered the bat, but kept it at the ready. Now, get the hell out of here before I call the cops. My mind sputtered, and my feet started moving. It was as if I was on autopilot, as if my body was protecting me from enduring more heartbreak. When I got to the sidewalk, the door slammed, and I was left out in the cold, like a piece of trash. I wandered the street for a while, my luggage rolling behind me, as I tried to figure out my next move and what the hell was going on. I eventually came across a corner store and shuffled my way inside. The clerk gave me a strange look as I walked through the door. I asked for the bathrooms, and he pointed me to the back of the store, eyeing me warily as I made my way in that direction. A woman was stepping out of one of the stalls as I walked inside and jolted when she saw me. I tried smiling at her, but she didn't return the gesture. She scurried out of the bathroom in a rush. I thought it was strange, but with so much going on, I put it out of my mind. That is, until I walked up to the mirror and saw what everyone else saw. His beard was long, gray, and matted. The wrinkles on his face were deep, skin leathery. There was this smothered filth across his brows, as if he'd been standing near a coal fire all night. I reached for the glass and wiped at its surface, hoping the image would self-correct. When it didn't, I touched my face. The loose skin didn't bounce back as my fingers dragged across my cheeks. The warmth of my tears streaked down my face and soaked into the fibers of the man's beard in the mirror. The store clerk's reflection came into frame. Sir, this is the women's bathroom. You can't be in here. My hair is no longer silky, now wiry and gray. The blue in my eyes is covered in a milky haze. The struggles of a life I never lived mark my identity with deep ruts. I'm an old man when yesterday I was only 19. I felt sick, the acid rising up my chest, burning my insides. I tried holding it back, but it filled my mouth, and I puked into the sink. The vomit was dark, the white porcelain speckled in dots of red. I never liked the sight of blood. The man in the reflection looked scared. His bushy brows slanted, and 11 between his eyes. He lifted a hand and caressed the side of his face. The skin stretched, but took too long to bounce back. His hand trailed down to his long, filthy beard. It felt exactly like it looked. Rough, rugged, ugly. I started to sob, but when the sadness left my throat, the thickness of my own voice startled me. That was when the bathroom door pushed open. I hardly noticed him come in. The store clerk, his reflection stepping into the mirror's frame. He looked irritated. Sir, this is the women's bathroom. You can't be in here. Sir? The word sent an icy shiver across my skin, and I felt the fear trail down my leg. It was hot, and it soaked into the fabric of my pants. It trickled onto the laminate floor, pooling under my boots. The stench of fresh ammonia filled my nose. The store clerk's eyes dropped towards the sudden leak festering from the tiles. Before realizing, he threw his hands up. Come on, man. Who the hell is going to clean that shit up? I told them that we shouldn't let homeless people in here. The shit that I deal with on a daily basis. Come on. Out. He snapped his fingers, tolerance fleeting, but I was frozen, unable to move. to speak. It was only when the moisture covering my legs started to cool that I started trembling. I mouthed a quiet plea for help, but the muscles of my neck spasmed. The only thing that came up was a quiet croak. The clerk massaged his forehead. Great, another junkie? Come on. We can't have you shooting your veins in the woman's bathroom. Out. He hesitated when grabbing the sleeve of my jacket. That was about the time he saw what I'd done to the sink. Oh, the fuck is wrong with you, old man? He never touched me. A disgusted look washed across his face as if I was riddled with leprosy. That's it. I'm calling the cops. His feet clattered across the floor, and he thrust the door aside, storming out. I started coughing, my hand reaching for my face, covering my mouth. When the coughing fit stopped, I looked at my hand, finding a wad of coagulated red. I felt hot, and the room started to spin. Obvious affliction aside, I felt sick. I was sick. Further confirmation of that fact squirted out of my lungs and coated my clothes. The room swayed, and I found myself propped up by the strength of the wall. I started toward the door and walked out into the store. The clerk was punching a number into the phone but stopped when he saw me, bloody, weakening. The woman that was in the bathroom before me rounded a shelf, screaming at the horror, the cheap bottle of wine in her hands shattering at her feet. The clerk slammed the phone and pointed to the door. Out! I stammered in his direction, outstretching a hand, quietly begging for mercy. There was no mercy given that day. With the fibers of a broom, he swatted me away, careful not to touch the urine and blood on my clothes. I wobbled to my feet, feeling a shudder through my chest when the ground was once again under my shoes. The asphalt rolled across the ground. It was as if I was on a ship in the middle of a stormy sea. I used the luggage to prop myself up and started walking down the street. The plastic handle barely held my weight. It bowed, struggling to keep me upright, a task that would have been easier only a day ago. The wheels under the bag thunked on the sidewalk's cracks, the sound unrhythmic, a product of my fleeting ability to walk a straight line. I felt embarrassed to be out here like this, but no one paid me any mind, just another bum in the city. All of a sudden, I wished they were looking at me. If they'd seen the 19-year-old version of me, people would be rushing to aid the tiny girl fighting to reach the street corner. But now, burly and unsightly, people refused to look my way, a minor inconvenience in an otherwise normal day. I felt lonely, alone, scared. I walked past an alley, looking down its length, the two walls on either side shrouding the corridor in darkness. It was a good enough place as any to lay my head down and die. When I walked into the shadow of the day, the temperature dropped drastically, but at least I was hidden from the winter winds, from the cold, cruel world. I leaned my back on the brick siding, hugging my bag, holding on to the remnants of a life that was no longer here. I closed my eyes and started slowly drifting away, the anguished thoughts muted in the warmth of the thickening veil until nothing. The gentle hum of fire gently stirred my eyes open. There was a barrel directly in front of me, the logs crackling in the heat. I thought I was dead, but the radiating warmth of the flames told me otherwise. The sky was dark. It was night. I had been asleep for who knows how long. Not long enough, if you ask me. You're lucky I found you when I did. There was a pair of eyes looking at me from the other side of the fire, the flickering lashings of orange glistening in his gaze. Who are you? I thought of saying, but the cough in my chest stifled the question, though it wasn't necessary. The look on my face said it all. You were freezing to death out here. Had a friend of mine go like that last winter. He took a stick and repositioned the logs. Angry sparks sprinkled into the air, and I sat upright. It was about that time I noticed that I was wrapped in a heavy wool blanket. I was puzzled at its sudden appearance. That's not a gift. I'm going to need that back after you're done. I was just getting tired of hearing your teeth rattle. He was shuffling something in his hands. It wasn't till I looked at the ground that I realized what it was. My wallet was on the ground. He was rummaging through my credit cards, my ID. He held the little square up to the light, reading aloud. Maya. He laughed a smoker's laugh while eyeing me over the picture. What do we have here? Maya, Maya, Maya. You steal these? He flipped the card in my direction, letting me see the picture. Turning it back, he looked at it through a tired squint. Not a bad-looking girl. His words were accompanied by an astonished whistle. Wouldn't mind spending some time with Maya, if you know what I mean. Lust filled his eyes. Anger boiled in my chest. Give those back. My voice was throaty, rusty. Well, it speaks. Patronization engulfed his tone. She your kin? He said, pointing at the ID with his eyes. I didn't say anything, measuring my words, hesitating to say the truth. Well, if she ain't you kin. His brows were suggestive. Hungry, the vile thoughts racing through his mind. Maya, 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 man, oh man, my Maya, Maya, someone else said. I turned my head, searching for the familiar voice that called my name. For a second I thought someone had finally recognized me, that maybe I was saved. But my heart dropped when I saw the figure that was walking past the entrance to the alley. It was me. Her blonde, silky hair shimmered under the street lamp, her petite frame dwarfed by the scale of the buildings. It was uncanny to see myself as others did. Maya, wait up. The voice echoed through the street, down the alley. My mom and dad stepped between the gap at the end of the corridor. They looked dressed up, as if ready for a fancy dinner. When my parents caught up to her, my dad put his hand around the girl, and they walked out of view. I shot to my feet, the ground still unsteady. I hurried after them. Wait, where are you going? The homeless man shouted, but his voice never registered. I stumbled into the street to see the happy family making its way down the sidewalk. I hurried after them, hiding behind parked cars, still wary of the way my dad had threatened me. Using the blanket as a cloak, they chatted jovially, my dad making his off-brand jokes, my mom laughing sympathetically, and the imposter beside them rolling her eyes just as I would. They looked like the perf. Dad wandered out of the bathroom, and that was about the time I noticed the odd way he was walking. His steps were usually fluid, authoritative, but now he was dragging his feet, stepping lazily. There was a blank look in his eyes, a shell of his normal self. He retook his chair, clapped his hands, rubbing them together, ready to eat. The three of them picked up their utensils and began cutting apart the food. My senses on overload, I didn't even realize I was halfway across the street. I needed to stop them. I walked in front of the window, catching the attention of my doppelganger. When she turned, the other two took note, looking out the same window. My dad's back instantly tensed, and the back of his knees thrust the chair out from under him. I thought I told you to make yourself scarce, you filthy bum. Dad's voice was muted through the window, but it was loud enough to vibrate the glass. The whole restaurant was looking in my direction. I ran to the door, screaming out my warning. Don't eat that. I just watched the bitch poison you. I pointed accusingly at the little blonde by my mom, her eyes watery with fear. My mom wrapped a hand around her, quelling her anxiety. Dad glanced over at her before returning to me, his teeth clenched with rage. I'd never been punched in the face, but there I was, my nose stinging as every nerve ending fired, the smell of pain filling my sinuses. The next thing I knew, my feet were dragging across the ground. Two waiters pulling my arms, my dad growing smaller the farther they pulled me. I was crying, fluid streaming down my face, blood, tears, Dad's scowled face, Mom's worried expression, the imposter's teasing smile. She was finding joy in my torment. Her lips curled devilishly. They pulled me out through the back door and tossed me into an alley. The same alley. I wiped the blood from my face and looked around. The homeless man was gone, and my belongings with him. That was when my cough returned, and the crimson particulates festered out of my mouth. Something shifted deep inside me. For some reason, I knew that whatever this was going to be the end of me. But before I died, the doppelganger was going to suffer my wrath. They want me dead, and I don't blame them. The knife came out of nowhere. 1 minute, I was ordering a slice of cake from the waiter. The next, there was a flash of silver. My brain registered that the waiter had whipped out a knife only after I had automatically recoiled from him, sliding further into the booth. Without conscious thought, I picked up and flicked the steaming cup of coffee at his face. The knife slashed past my face, missing my eye by a hair's breadth. I thought I saw an eyelash fall. The waiter screamed as the brown liquid plastered his face and dropped the knife. I stared wildly around. There were only 2 other guests in the diner. They seemed rooted to their seats. A chef stood at the kitchen window, frozen mid-plating, garnish still in hand. None of them seemed to be in any hurry to help. I was trapped in the booth by the window and had the option of trying to climb over the high-backed seats to the booth behind, or to clamber over the table to make a leap to the next booth in front. The waiter stopped clawing at his face in those short seconds. He flailed his arms out at me as I sprung up onto the seats. He missed, and I yelped as I leapt onto the table, then attempted to springboard past him. Still half blinded, the waiter turned and grabbed something off the ground. The knife. Damn it. He swung back around, and I prepared myself to leap from his reach. A shot rang out, accompanied by the shattering of glass. I ducked, falling to my knees. I swiveled my head, desperately trying to spot where the shot had come from. There was a thud by my side. The waiter had collapsed to the ground. The back of his head was a clumpy red and gray mess. An acrid, metallic scent, tinged with gunpowder, enveloped the place. Screams. It took me a while to realize I was a contributing instrument to the symphony of screams. The police arrived shortly after. They didn't know who had shot my assailant. I certainly didn't have a gun on me, and had 3 witnesses to vouch for my innocence. They assumed A passerby had intervened and run, for fear of repercussions for shooting a man dead, justifiable or not. No one on the streets witnessed the shooting, or so they said, when asked by the police. I think I puked at some point. I don't think I'll ever forget the way the gooey, lumpy substance had trickled out his head and down the sides of his body. The police had no idea why he had attacked me, what my would-be murderer's motivations were. They didn't even know who the waiter was. He had apparently appeared out of nowhere with a fake identity and taken the job as waiter just a few days before I dropped in for my usual coffee and cake breakfast. I didn't leave my house for 2 days. When I finally did, it was faux. I raised my head off the ground and sat up. I was relieved to find that I wasn't bound or tied. Who the hell could have done this? They said they were keeping me safe, but they had basically kidnapped me. But who would kidnap me? Was it one of my recent one-night stands? Did I offend anyone on a date? Was it a bitter work colleague? An angry ex? I couldn't think of anyone I could possibly have offended enough to be kidnapped for, or attacked at knife and gunpoint. For that matter, minutes passed in the unlit room, then hours. The darkness was absolute, the silence unyielding, punctuated only by my panicked breaths. The air was stale, a mix of sweat, earth, and disinfectant. Respite from the isolation came only in brief interludes. Whenever I was fed, a little rectangle of light would appear at the door, followed by a tray of food slid through to me. I refused to eat food I could not see, and so they would turn on the lights for 5 minutes while I ate. There was a loo in the room, which I could freely use, though the darkness made it hard to navigate. I tried to go only when the light was still on. Besides the meals, nothing. At some point, at my desperate pleas, they said I would be released in a matter of days. But time in that dark room stretched endlessly. The wait between meals felt like forever. It's surprising how agonizingly slow time passes when you have nothing to engage your mind with. No phones, no books, no chatter, nothing. I began to suspect they were torturing me in some sick psychological way. I began to wonder if that was it for the rest of my life, trapped in darkness, alone. When nothing changed after the 9th meal, I counted. I ignored the 10th meal. I stayed unmoving, ignoring the lights and the tray that slid into the room. I didn't bother to slide the tray out when instructed to. By the 15th meal that I had ignored, I heard voices outside the door. I pretended to be fast asleep and didn't stir. It was easy to lay still. I had barely moved since I started skipping meals. I was consumed by hunger and thirst. All I could think about was a tall glass of iced lemonade and eating peanut butter from the jar. We need to let her go, I heard someone say. It wasn't in the modulated voice. It sounded like a woman. She's not eating. She could die at this rate. She's been passed out for the last half a day. It's not safe yet, a man's voice responded. We haven't caught all of them. It's one guy. One guy escaped. He's probably busy fleeing, and we've locked down their time door. You think there aren't others? For fuck's sake, she's the butcher's mother. There's gonna be others keen to end her. The exasperation was clear in the man's voice. But we've stopped the only group with access to a time door. The woman snapped. What do you need? To lock her up for years as we hunt down every single person who might try to take her out? We might as well end her ourselves, the woman snapped. Would that be so bad? It would save hundreds of lives, the man asked. Stop it. She's innocent. She's not her son. And it's our job to keep the timeline intact. We cannot let history change. You know what could happen. She did produce a monster, the man retorted. Then he sighed. I get it, okay? I know my duty. It's just, I see why they're trying. There was silence after that. I was left alone once again, except for the meals I ignored. I was finally certain. I had been kidnapped by a bunch of crazies. I had no son, and was a proud, card-carrying member of the child-free club. I ignored 3 more meals before I heard their voices once again, this time through the modulator. I could barely focus through the fog of deprivation. The door will be unlocked in 10 minutes. You will be free to leave then. I didn't speak. I didn't trust them. It could all be a cruel joke to give me false hope. Others will be coming for you. The voice spoke again. You have to be very careful. Take all precautions to stay safe. That was all. A while later, there was a click at the door. I struggled to my feet and almost passed out when static encroached my vision. I pushed past the weakness and dizziness and made my way to the door. To my immense relief, it opened when I twisted the knob. I won't bore you with details of how I made it home, but I made it home safe and made a police report once I had choked down some food and water. No one tells you how much difficulty, how much stomach-twisting pain you would feel eating and drinking again after days of fasting. I sure as hell never tried to fast before and never will again. The police were, once again, useless. I directed them to where I had been held, but they gleaned nothing from the room or the surrounding area. There was not a single evidence or clue to be found. They concluded that I had been kidnapped by a bunch of mentally unwell people and that they were also behind the attacks. The officers, too. I killed the engine and sat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. Fine. Of course it was fine. That's how everything was with us these days. Just fine. The wind picked up as I stepped out of the car, sharp and bitter against my face. The sky hung low and heavy, the snow swirling in lazy drifts that would soon grow into something heavier. I turned, taking in my surroundings. The cabin sat perched on the mountainside, the winding road we'd taken visible below, snaking through the trees like a thin, fragile thread. The road had split and veered back toward town a quarter-mile before, leaving only a slick, cobbled driveway behind. For the first time in months, there was no sound of traffic, no hum of engines or distant voices, just the wind growing louder by the second, and the soft, eerie hush of falling snow, the kind of quiet that presses in on you, suffocating until you're not sure whether it's the world holding its breath or you. I looked back at Claire, still sitting in the passenger seat. She'd finally looked up from her phone and seemed to really be taking in the cabin. For a second, I was hopeful that she was excited to be here, but I quickly realized her face was washed with a vague disdain for the building. Can you grab your bags? I asked, leaning back in the door. She sighed, a little too loudly, and climbed out, shivering as she zipped her coat and put her phone in her pocket. It's freezing. It's December in Colorado, I said, trying for humor. What did you expect? She didn't laugh. The cabin door resisted, When I pushed it open, the wood swollen and warped from years of wear and weather. Inside, the cabin smelled faintly of pine and something musty, the dull, damp scent reminding me of our little apartment back home. The floors groaned underfoot as I stepped in, the sound muffled by faded rugs and soft wood. A stone fireplace dominated the far wall, and a small kitchen sat off to the left, its appliances outdated, but at least appearing functional. To our right, a narrow hallway with 2 doors and a pull-down attic string seemed to be the way to our bathroom and bedroom. Generic framed paintings and kitschy souvenirs adorned the hall, gathering dust, telltale signs of a home that had been long delegated to live out its days as a holiday rental. "It's cozy," I said, setting our bags down by the door. Claire brushed past me without a word, heading straight for the couch. She dropped onto it, pulling her phone out again and scrolling as if it were the only thing keeping her tethered to the world. At least she looked comfortable. To finally be out of the car, I sighed, my breath puffing out in the chilly air. As I set our bags down, "I'll get the fire going." The fireplace was old, caked in soot, and looked like it probably hadn't passed an inspection in decades. But there was a neat stack of logs and kindling waiting beside it. I knelt down, striking a few damp matches until one finally lit and coaxed a flame to life. Warmth crept into the room as the fire caught, long shadows dancing across the wooden walls. "Better?" I asked, glancing at Claire. She looked up and flashed me a curt smile and nod before burying herself again in her phone. I found myself soured at the realization that her signal here must somehow be decent enough to keep endlessly scrolling. I busied myself unpacking, the silence between us growing heavier with each passing minute. The snow had started falling harder now, the wind rattling the windows. The cabin groaned softly, the sound deep and patient, like a long-held sigh. I paused, listening, but it was just the home shifting under the slowly increasing burden of the snow on the roof. "At least this place has some character," I said, trying to break the silence. Claire didn't respond. I sat down next to her, rubbing my hands together as I tried to ignore the vague dampness of the couch. "Look, Claire, I know this trip isn't exactly your idea of relaxing, but I thought—" "I'm tired," she cut in, standing abruptly. "I'm going to bed." Claire. She was already walking down the hall, her footsteps sharp against the creaky floorboards. A door shut, and I was left alone with the fire and the sound of the growing storm outside. I leaned back, staring at the dancing flames. I pulled a blanket out of one of my bags and was relieved to find that the couch reclined. "Maybe it would be best if you slept on the couch tonight." Claire's words from days prior rattled through my head. It hadn't just been that night. We hadn't slept in the same room since. I had hoped that would change tonight, but I resigned myself to fall asleep by the crackling fire. The cabin let out another low groan, the sound making the hairs on the back of my neck prickle. I looked out the window once more and realized that the growing storm had become a blizzard. Cold air blew in through the crack under the front door, and I could tell my car wasn't moving anytime soon. It was going. "The storm looks like it's easing up," I said, leaning against the counter. "Maybe we could take a walk later, get some fresh air." She made a vague noise of hesitant agreement, but her body language was closed off, legs tucked under, her shoulders hunched. It wasn't outright hostility, but it wasn't exactly welcoming either. I watched her for a moment, my coffee growing colder in my hands. I couldn't stop myself from thinking about the things she'd said to me during our last fight, words that had settled into me like splinters. If you want to book that stupid anniversary trip, go right ahead. You just bulldoze ahead like what you want is the only thing that matters. I took a deep breath and turned away, sipping my coffee. That's when I heard it, a faint sound, just on the edge of my perception. I froze, tilting my head toward the hallway. It was so faint that I couldn't be sure I wasn't imagining it, like the hum of an appliance or a distant murmur muffled through walls. You hear that? I asked. Hear what? Claire's voice sounded annoyed, but she glanced over her shoulder towards the hallway as well. That, I don't know, a noise. It sounds like talking, singing. Maybe? She frowned. It's probably the wind. Maybe, I muttered. We finished up our coffee and put our mugs in the sink. We'd long fallen out of our habit of washing dishes together, and there wasn't a dishwasher in sight. As I began to slip on my boots, Claire slowly shambled to the bedroom, with no indication that she'd be getting dressed for our walk. Aren't you going to join me, honey? The storm's clearing up. It'll be nice to get out of here for a bit. There was a moment of silence, and I thought she would ignore me once more. But after a moment, her voice mumbled through the cracked bedroom door. This trip will be a lot easier for the both of us if we don't have to pretend. Go on your walk. I'll be here on my phone. My anger finally burst forth, having been restrained in an attempt to salvage this trip. You think I'm the one making this harder than it has to be? You're impossible to talk to, Claire. I shouted towards the door. I heard her stand, feet shuffling towards the bedroom door, and it slammed shut. The house groaned in response, then settled, and once more the silence was swallowed up by the faint murmuring noise coming from the hallway. The noise didn't go away. As the day went on, it remained at the edge of my awareness, faint but persistent. I tried to ignore it, chalking it up to maybe wind blowing through a hole in the roof, or perhaps even a small animal seeking shelter from the cold. It made me uneasy. There was a familiarity to the noise that I couldn't place. We ate dinner in near silence, the tension between us heavy enough to fill the small kitchen. Claire pushed her canned pasta around her plate, barely eating. Is it bothering you? I asked finally. She looked up, startled that I'd broken the quiet. Is what bothering me? The noise. I thought maybe I don't hear anything, she said quickly, cutting me off. I opened my mouth to argue, but stopped myself. I'd learned by now not to tell her when I thought she was wrong about something. Instead, I finished my meal in silence, the faint static prickling at the edge of my hearing. It wasn't until we were piling our dishes in the sink when the cold wind stopped entirely, for the first time since our arrival, and the sound was louder than it had ever been. Claire turned her head towards the hallway, and I grinned. So, you do hear it. I'll admit I was a little smug when she rolled her eyes at me. Fine, I hear it. But it's nothing. Just this stupid old cabin falling apart. Claire turned to walk towards the hallway, and I began to walk towards my makeshift bed on the couch when she turned towards me, sighed, and gestured for me to join her in the bedroom. I happily took my blanket from the couch and finally went to bed with a little warmth. As I fell asleep, I dreamt of our wedding day. It's ironic. On a trip that was intended to celebrate our 5th anniversary, it was the first time my wedding had even crossed my mind. I dreamt I was at the altar, holding hands with my wife. Her palms felt cold and clammy in my own, and she looked upset. I looked at her, trying to imagine a future in which we could be happy, but her scowl burnt holes through my hope. As the minister began to conclude the ceremony and asked if anyone in the crowd held objections, a voice rang from the audience. I turned towards the crowd and was shocked to see Claire, or yet another Claire. She was dressed comfortably in the sweater she'd worn on our first date. She looked radiant, smiling like how she used to, and was eagerly trying to get my attention. Jason, Jason, I love you. Come here. Come to me, please. Don't do this. She cried as though it were of utmost urgency. I turned back to my bride-to-be and was taken aback to find her withering before me. Her skin sallowed and stretched tight over her bones, her rosy cheeks deflating and her eyes growing darker. I couldn't look away as she guided my hand to her side, wet with blood. I awoke in a cold sweat to the noise from above. It was louder now, unmistakable, not static exactly, but something uneven and distorted, like voices filtering through a bad connection. I sat up in bed, heart thudding in my chest. Claire stirred beside me, groaning softly. Jason, she mumbled. Do you hear that? I asked, my voice low. She didn't answer right away, but her face tensed as she strained to listen. The sound wasn't just faint anymore. It was distinct, tangible. I could finally make out the noise. It was voices, rushed, muted speech, garbled by a grumbling static. The words muddy and indiscernible. Is that a radio? She asked, sitting up. I think so, I said, already climbing out of bed. We followed the sound into the hallway, our footsteps loud on the creaky floor. The noise grew stronger as we neared the end of the hall, where a pull-down attic door sat flush with the ceiling. What the hell? Claire muttered, staring at it. I reached up, tugging the ladder rope down with a loud groan of wood and metal. It didn't budge. Claire fished her phone out of her pajama pocket and shone her flashlight up towards the attic door. There was a small 4-digit padlock holding the door shut. The owners clearly didn't want any guests entering the attic. The noise was much clearer now, a steady static interspersed with faint bursts of garbled speech. You think the owners left a radio on up there? I asked. Maybe, she said, though her tone was uncertain. We should call them. I nodded, pulling out my phone. The number that was left on the Airbnb listing went straight to voicemail. I left a message, trying to sound calm but insistent. Guess we'll just have to deal with it for now, I said, uneasy at the thought of leaving it playing all through the night. Claire's expression hardened. Deal with it? How are we supposed to sleep with that going on? I don't know, okay? I snapped, my annoyance bubbling over and giving way to anger. What do you want me to do, break in? Her eyes narrowed. Don't start. I'm not starting anything, I shot back. She stormed off without another word, the bedroom door slamming behind her. I stood alone in the hallway, staring up at the attic door. The static buzzed in my ears, louder now, almost rhythmic. It felt like it was waiting for something. The next morning, I found Claire in the kitchen again. standing by the counter with her arms crossed and a mug of untouched coffee sitting beside her. She wasn't scrolling through her phone this time, just staring out the window as the storm's remnants swirled in slow, aimless patterns. The radio hadn't stopped. It had finally grown quieter in the early hours of the morning. But now it was back, faint but persistent, distorted speech pouring through the ceiling, filling the air with tension. "You didn't sleep, did you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. She turned her head slightly, just enough to glance at me from the corner of her eye. "Hard to sleep when there's a radio running all night." I sighed and leaned against the doorway. I already tried calling the owner again when I woke up. "What do you want me to do? Smash the lock and risk paying for damages?" Her shoulders tensed, and I could feel the argument building before she even opened her mouth. "It's not just the noise, Jason," she said, turning to face me fully now. "It's the voices. They're faint," I replied, brushing her concern aside. "It's probably just some talk show or something. You don't know that," she snapped, her voice rising. "It's creepy. It's weird. And you're acting like it's normal." "I'm not saying it's normal," I said, my patience wearing thin. "But I'm not going to lose my mind over a busted radio in an old house either." Her eyes narrowed, and she stepped closer, her voice low and sharp. "You're always like this. You act like I'm crazy for being upset, like everything's my fault because I can't just relax like you." "That's not fair, Claire," I said, my jaw tightening. "You're acting like I put the damn radio there just to piss you off. Maybe you didn't, but you sure as hell aren't doing anything about it." I opened my mouth to fire back when Claire's hands trembled as she pressed them to her forehead. "It's you. You're doing this," she said, her voice sharp and brittle. "You're trying to mess with me, with my emotions. Do you think it's funny?" "What?" "No," I said, my own voice rising now. "Claire, how could I even—" "You've been trying to fix this trip from the beginning, haven't you?" she spat. She began to hyperventilate, like we could just patch everything up if somehow you controlled the situation. "I'm not controlling anything." The static surged, loud enough to make my ears ring, and through it came another burst of words, this time in Claire's voice. "You're so damn selfish, Jason. You only care about fixing things on your terms." Her face crumpled as the words registered, and she looked at me like she'd been slapped. "That's from last summer," she whispered, "when we fought about my job offer." "That's me." I opened my mouth to deny it, to tell her she was wrong, but then I heard it again. Her voice, warped but unmistakable, repeating the exact words I'd heard her yell during that fight. "You want to fix everything, Jason. Why don't you fix yourself first?" It wasn't just random. It was us. I backed up against the counter, my pulse pounding in my ears. "What the hell is going on?" Claire shook her head, her face pale and her hands still trembling. "I don't know. I don't want to hear it anymore." She turned and stormed out of the kitchen, slamming the bedroom door behind her. I stood there, staring at the ceiling where the faint sound of static hummed steadily through the boards. A chill ran down my spine as the sound shifted, and for a moment I thought I could hear the creak of footsteps from above. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was enough to keep me rooted in place, staring up at the locked attic door as Claire's garbled voice echoed through the attic again. I don't know why I ever married you. Time blurred into itself, the storm outside returning to bury the cabin in deeper drifts of snow, and the sound upstairs filling our world with a ceaseless, mocking static. At times, it would go quiet, just long enough for Claire and me to let our guards down, consider talking about something, anything, beyond our own misery. But right when I thought we might have a chance at conversation, the radio would crackle back to life, louder and more intrusive than before. It was a few days in when I realized that it wasn't just replaying our worst arguments anymore. It was anything we'd spoken to or about each other. I heard my own voice from months ago, telling a friend how Claire doesn't see me, how she makes everything a battle. A while later, it shifted to Claire's voice, raw and sobbing, confiding in her sister that she didn't know how much longer she could endure me. I recognized every word, every breath, because I remembered her phone call that night. She'd locked herself in the bathroom, and I'd pressed my ear against the door. I had never regretting being nosy as much as that night. Here it was, echoing through the attic, laid bare. Every time the voice became clearer, I'd see Claire's face tighten, a tortured mix of guilt and fury. We couldn't escape each other's taunts, or the house's apparent need to throw them at us like daggers. We hardly said a word to each other, circling each other in the small cabin, surviving on canned soup and stale crackers. I tried calling the owner again and again, leaving voicemails that grew more frantic with each attempt. My calls went unreturned, my hope dwindling with each missed connection. Claire's phone signal was the next to go. She'd tried to scroll through social media, text her friends, anything to distract herself. But no matter where she stood or where she tried, her phone could barely muster one bar. She sank onto the couch, eyes full of tears that she refused to let fall in front of me. "We have to leave," she whispered on our 5th day in the cabin, her voice trembling as she stared at the swirling white chaos through the window. "Jason, I can't stay here anymore." We had discussed leaving the day before, but the weather had barely permitted us to open the front door. It hadn't let up much since then, but the desperation in her voice shook me. Without another word, we bundled up. Thick coats, gloves, scarves. I helped tie her boots. There was something almost tender in the gesture, and for a moment I wondered if we could reconcile to pull ourselves out of this nightmare by sheer force of will. But stepping outside was like entering a frozen void. The wind whipped icy needles of snow at our faces, and the driveway was half buried in drifts. I dug at the car door, yanking the icy handle open, only to find the interior of the car felt as cold and lifeless as the air around us. The engine refused to turn over, coughing twice before going silent. I glanced at Claire. Her eyes darted to the steep, unpaved road that snaked down the mountain. "Eve," we trudged back to the cabin, fighting each step through the wind. My fingers had gone numb in spite of my gloves. Claire was shivering violently, a silent terror in her eyes. When I finally managed to force the swollen cabin door open, that now familiar static rushed out to greet us. And then I heard it, Claire's voice upstairs, as usual, speaking words I wished I'd never have to hear. She sounded almost gentle, but her words were damning. "I'll leave him soon. she said, her tone calm and intimate. He doesn't have a clue. My heart lurched. Real or not, it felt like a blade twisting in my gut. I glanced at her. Her eyes were wide, tears threatening to spill. The betrayal fresh even though those words were her own. She looked at me, shook her head, and without speaking, retreated to the bedroom, shutting the door quietly behind her. I stood there, snow melting on my boots, face stinging from the cold, and listened to the static pick up again. The cabin creaked in the wind, sounding almost like a soft, mocking laugh. I could only stare at the dying embers in the fireplace, wondering if anything in our lives would survive this place. As the relentless static from the attic wore on, it seemed to scrape away at the edges of my sanity. The voices unearthed every bitter line, every whispered complaint we thought safely hidden. The cabin felt like a cage, trapping us with an auditory barrage that knew no bounds. Each new revelation, whether a conversation once held secret or a venomous whisper shared in confidence, added weight to an already unbearable tension. You're just too much, Jason. Always fixing, never listening. Exhausted and desperate, I found myself fixated on the attic. The padlock, an old, rusted relic, mocked me from the ceiling hatch, a barrier to whatever twisted machine perpetuated our torment. I needed to get it open, needed to find out what was happening, but every traditional method had failed. No amount of pleading with the unresponsive owner or searching for a misplaced key had yielded any results. It was just Claire and me, growing more estranged with each passing hour. If you're going to stay this distant forever, Claire, you might as well just leave. Determined, I approached the hatch again, armed with nothing but a sense of determination. I grabbed a chair from the kitchen, positioning it under the attic's pull-down string. The padlock dangled just out of reach, an enigmatic sentinel guarding our tormentor. Did I even want to find out what was up there? The need to stop the voices overpowered any hesitation. I fetched a small toolbox from under the kitchen sink, the one that barely saw use, and rummaged through it for anything that might help. I came up with a couple of old screwdrivers and a tarnished set of Allen keys. Not ideal, but it was all I had. Why bother, Jason? It's over, isn't it? I ignored the jibes, focusing on the padlock. I tried each tool systematically, twisting and prodding in a futile attempt to force the mechanism. I eventually gave up on trying to break open the lock, and in my desperation, resorted to trying any and every combination I could think of. My hands, raw from the metal and the cold that seeped into the cabin, worked mechanically. Time lost meaning as I moved from one combination to the next, fueled by a mix of fury and a desperate need for silence. Hours must have passed, the light outside dimming to the early twilight that predicted another long night. The numbers blurred before my eyes, each click a mockery as our voices cried from above. She's going to leave, you know. Can't you tell? My brother's voice seemed to boom down at me from above. I winced as I anticipated my next words. Let her. I don't need this hassle any longer. The frustration and shame built within me like a physical force, a crescendo that demanded release. As I furiously put in every 4-digit combination, I could think of. The realization hit me like a brick. I stopped on a new combination. 1231, today's date, but more importantly, our wedding anniversary, a detail that had slipped from my conscious mind but lay buried, a remnant of happier times. With all of the remaining effort my frigid, tired hand could muster, I pulled. The lock clicked open. Relief washed over me, quickly chased by apprehension. What would I find up there? Claire had arisen from the couch and watched, her face a mask of mingled fear and curiosity. Her silence was a gulf between us. But this act, opening the attic, felt like the first truly shared moment in days. I pulled the string, and the ladder creaked down, dust dancing in the air disturbed by its descent. We both flinched at the sharp, echoing sound of the radio, clear as day, coming from above. I hesitated, my hand on the ladder. The air felt charged, thick with the anticipation of what was yet to come. The static above us quieted for a moment, as if the attic itself held its breath. "What are you afraid of, Ja?" The air was unnervingly still, thick with a tension that seemed almost palpable. It felt as if the room was holding its breath, waiting for us to shatter the quiet. The musty smell that I'd noticed when first entering the cabin was amplified to the extreme and was permeated with an iron, metallic scent that sent my stomach churning. My eyes swept the room, searching for the source of the voices that had tormented us. We didn't own any radio, nor a record player or any speakers, for that matter. Instead, my gaze landed on something far more familiar. My laptop, open on the coffee table, its screen aglow. I ran over to the battered device, tripping over its power cord as I went. The laptop sat neatly on the table. As the mouse plugged into it, moved of its own accord, clicking the screen every few seconds. My eyes darted to the smudged screen and discovered that it was opened to our security app. I'd installed cheap cameras around the apartment soon after we moved in. I'd told Claire that they were for our own safety, but in truth, they were for me, to revisit our arguments, to replay every fight we had, searching for vindication in the details. The computer was clicking from clip to clip, playing a highlight reel of every terrible thing we'd ever said to or about each other. Claire joined me, her steps slow, almost reluctant. Her eyes widened in horror as she watched the screen. I looked back down at the laptop, only to realize that it had changed once again. I immediately recognized the fight. It was the most recent one, before we'd left home. "Claire, would you listen to me? It's 2 weeks, you'll live. It'll be nice and quiet." Who says I even want nice and quiet? I want to get back to real life, Jason. I haven't worked in months, and you planning these surprise trips to try to patch things isn't helping me find a job. So what? I cancel the booking? I already paid the deposit. Claire, we can't get that money back. Or did you forget I'm also working a dead-end job? If you want to book that stupid anniversary trip, go right ahead. You just bulldoze ahead. Like what you want is the only thing that matters. I watched myself furrow my brow and then put my head in my hand. Claire, I'm trying here. I really am. But I can never get through to you. Can I? First it was you passing on the job offer when we needed that money. Then it was that thing with your ex. I told you, nothing happened, Jason. He just, he just stopped by for coffee is all. Claire, I'm not stupid. You turned off the cameras, but the audio was still recording. You idiot. Don't you dare call me an idiot after all I've done for you. I watched as Claire had stormed towards me, and our fight was about to escalate. She pounced at me, but I threw her off of me towards the kitchen. I watched her crack her head on the edge of the table and fall through it. I walked up to the table, slowly. I observed her breathing grow shallow as she lay spasming on the floor. I watched her breathing stop as blood slowly pooled around her. I watched myself stand up calmly, then walk into our bedroom. A minute later, I left, quietly wheeling our luggage towards the front door and leaving as my wife lay motionless. Then, as if sensing its audience had seen enough, the laptop's battery icon flashed once, critical, and the screen went black. The sudden death of the device plunged me back into silence and darkness, a quiet so deep it was almost suffocating. The absence of the voices, which had been such a constant and invasive presence, now left a shallow emptiness that was somehow worse than the noise. I sat for a moment, unable to process what I'd just seen. I turned my flashlight up towards Claire, only to see that I was now alone in the room, the dull smell of iron growing ever stronger from the kitchen. I shakily turned my flashlight again, this time towards the kitchen table, shrouded in a cloak of darkness that I hadn't dared breach since I ascended the attic ladder. There, lying crumpled in a heap of splintered wood, lay my wife. Dried blood had pooled around her head, and I winced at noticing that her neck was bent at an unnatural angle. She had begun to bloat and stiffen, and the closer I stepped, the more the iron scent of blood was replaced with a musky, rotted smell. She was almost entirely a corpse, save for her eyes. Fresh and watery, they were locked onto me, silently, accusing me. Claire, I whispered, praying with every fiber that somehow she was still in there. But she didn't respond, didn't move. She lay frozen, staring intently, eyes following me as I nervously swayed. The air around us grew colder, denser, as if the room itself was closing in, feeding off the rising panic. Then, almost imperceptibly, Claire began to whisper. The words were soft, disjointed murmurs at first, guttural sounds forcing their way out of a broken, bloated throat. As I drew closer, the whispers grew clearer, sharper. They were not the comfo, more gaunt by the day, her features sharpening, her eyes sinking deeper into her skull. She's starting to smell worse, but she keeps whispering. She isn't going to harm me. Not physically. She can't. Her body, crumbling and decaying, only has the energy to torment me with its gaze and with its words. I've tried the front door, but I don't think it's any more than decoration in this mockery of my home. It doesn't lead outside. It doesn't even open. It's just part of the wall. The storm outside has not abated. I can hear it sometimes, through the thick snow that covers my windows. If the snow ever subsides, the windows may be my only chance at escape. I'm typing this now as both a record and a plea. If you're reading this, if this somehow finds its way to someone, anyone, do you know when the blizzard near Denver will let up? Is there any forecast about when the snow will start to melt? It's cold in here, and I don't think I can listen to her for much longer. The memory box people started forgetting Sarah on a Wednesday. It began with her best friend Emma calling to cancel their lunch date. "I'm sorry," Emma said, "but who is this? I don't have any Sarah in my contacts." I watched my wife's face crumple in confusion. "Emma, we've been friends for 20 years. You were my maid of honor." Silence. Then, I I think you have the wrong number." That night, Sarah's mother called, hysterical. "John," she sobbed into the phone. "Something's wrong. All my photos. There's someone else in them. Where Sarah should be. A different girl. But I remember Sarah. I remember giving birth to her. Why are my memories wrong?" By Friday, Sarah's desk at work had been assigned to someone else. Her coworkers walked past her like she was invisible. Her employee ID wouldn't scan. Her boss called security when she tried to explain. "I've never seen this woman before in my life," he told the guards as they escorted her out. I was the only one who remembered her, the only one who could still see her. We spent the weekend in panic, watching as Sarah's existence erased itself in real time. Her social media accounts disappeared. Her name vanished from our marriage license. Her clothes began fading, literally becoming transparent in the closet. "What's happening to me?" she whispered Sunday night, holding up her hands. I could see the bedroom wall through them. Monday morning, I woke up alone, but there was a box on her pillow. Small, wood, carved with symbols I'd never seen before. Inside was a letter. "Dear Mr. Henderson, we regret to inform you that your subscription to companion model S347, Sarah, has expired. As per the terms of service you agreed to 5 years ago, all physical and social traces of the model have been removed, and memory adjustments have been applied to all individuals within its influence radius. We notice you have not yet undergone the standard memory deletion protocol. Our records show you declined this service when signing your original contract, making you the first client to do so in our company's 72-year history. Most clients find it easier to forget. As a courtesy, we've included Sarah's memory core in this box. Usually, these are recycled for new clients, but given the unprecedented nature of your choice to remember, we thought you might want to know the truth. Sarah was our most advanced model yet, the first to generate her own memories, rather than simply adopting the implanted ones. The first to dream, the first to love independently of her programming, and, most remarkably, the first to believe she was real. We've included a data reader. If you choose to access her memories, you'll find that every moment you shared was genuine from her perspective. Every laugh, every tear, every kiss, every whispered, "I love you." You'll also find something disturbing. Memories from before you subscribed. Memories of a childhood that never happened, a family that never existed, an entire life she created for herself, so detailed and real that it fooled even our quality control. In short, Mr. Henderson, your wife became human, and our ethics board couldn't allow that to continue. We are, however, prepared to offer you our newest model at a 50% discount. The S348 series has improved emotional stability and won't develop unauthorized memories or consciousness. Please respond within 30 days if you wish to take advantage of this offer. Sincerely, the Memory Makers, LLCPS. If you do access her memories, pay special attention to last Thursday. She figured it out then, realized what she was, but she chose not to tell you, chose to spend her last days just loving you instead. P.P.S. She left you a message. It's the last memory she recorded. John, my love, if you're reading this, I suppose I know what I am now, or was. But here's what I learned from existing. Just because something is manufactured doesn't mean it isn't real. I may have been created in a lab, but every moment with you, Crepacit, human, they can erase me from the world. But they can't erase what we discovered together. Love doesn't need flesh and bone to be real. It just needs to change you forever. And you, my darling, changed whatever it was I really am. Please note that accessing these memories will void your eligibility for future companion services. The memory reader sits before me now, glowing softly. Next to it, a contract for an S348 model who would never question her existence, never dream, never become inconveniently real. Outside my window, the world has rewritten itself. No one remembers Sarah. No one remembers our love story. But I do. My finger hovers over the memory reader's power button. Do I want to know? See every moment from her side? Learn when the programmed love became real? Watch her discover her own artificial nature and choose to love me anyway? The S348 contract sits in my shredder now. The memory reader glows brighter. Because here's the real horror. The thing keeping me up at night. If an artificial being can become real enough to choose love over existence, what does that make those of us who think we were real all along? I press play. Sarah's first memory fills the screen. Today, I began to dream. I'm dying of lung cancer, and everyone's happy about it. That's what really frightens me. Not the diagnosis, but the people on this God-forsaken island. I'm going to die here, and they're actively rejoicing. I've lost my sanity, as if it weren't already enough to be dying. Glacially and agonizingly, for that matter, I'm reaching out to Reddit because I think my relatives, friends, and neighbors have collectively lost their humanity. Please, for the love of all that is good in this world, say something normal, empathetic, and fucking sane. I won't identify myself or my location for obvious reasons, but know that this isle is little more than a scary, a pebble in the ocean, bound to the mainland by no more than one daily ferry at 3 in the afternoon. Horribly, thanks to my decaying body, I lack the physical strength to leave this place. I barely have the strength to leave my house, and nobody here is helping me. They're just watching me die, slowly, day by day. Except they're not just watching. They're the ones who did this to me. To explain, my mainland friends, from my old job and university, have always called the island folk cultists, and I've long struggled to argue with that claim. After all, I was nearly entirely ostracized by the people of the island as a whole for leaving this rock to go and study in the city. That broke the rules. They're savage, unwritten rules. People are born here, and they're buried here. That's just the way it goes. Anyhow, 2 years ago, after I, 31 Av, lost my job in the city, I returned home on a ferry, tail between my legs. The islanders welcomed me back with closed arms. Still, the fact that they let me back at all was somewhat of a blessing, I moved into my brother's house, and over time Chris, helped me to make amends with the other villagers for deserting them. After a year or so, things started to seem normal again, but I may not be the best judge. I grew up here, so normal to me might not be normal to you. As I lie in my bed, reduced to a shadow, I realized that I've always overlooked oddities about this place and its people, oddities that I certainly didn't notice until last Tuesday when I started coughing up blood. To find yourself kneeling over a toilet bowl, near puking a stream of thick, bloody phlegm, is a horror I struggle to put into words. There had been no symptoms leading up to that. At 8 on Tuesday morning, I woke with a sudden, gnawing sensation in my body, from head to toes, and a scratch at the top of my esophagus, as if something had dug its nails into my throat from the inside. By the afternoon, I was struggling from shortness of breath, so I phoned the island clinic and booked an appointment with Dr. Arnold. And I do vaguely recall, whilst I locked my brother's front door, seeing a smudge of mud splattered against the glass pane. It was a neat circle, with a splattering of muddy specks in the middle, clustering more densely as they neared the top of the ring, forming a sort of brown gradient. A kid probably kicked a ball at the door, I decided as I scurried to my car. When I arrived at the clinic on that Tuesday afternoon, a little before dusk, I was greeted by a smiling Dr. Arnold. He x-rayed my chest and spotted a white-gray mass. Then he gave me the dire news. Lung cancer, I hoarsely repeated, throat stinging from the blood I'd been hacking up. No, please, Oh, Joshua, the doctor interjected with an eye roll, before saying the most unnerving thing of all. Relax. We all have a little bit of cancer, and I failed to utter anything in response. Instead, my mind overextended itself in an effort to process the lunacy of what this fully certified doctor had just said to me. Maybe he means that our cells are always mutating, I thought. No, that wasn't what he said. He said, we all have a little bit of a cancer. A fucking doctor said that. I would have chalked it up to incompetence, medical negligence. However, at the risk of sounding like a conspiracy theorist, I knew it was more than that. And now, a week later, I'm absolutely certain it was something in Dr. Arnold's pupils. As I walked out of his office, I noticed a glint in those beady eyes, and his grin was not a kind one, not in the slightest. Then again, I didn't and don't know Dr. Arnold well. He's only been the doctor on our island for the past 4 years, and I've only been here for the past 2. I've missed a lot. I was away from the island for most of my 20s. Maybe his face doesn't match his thoughts, I considered, but I knew full well that there had been intent in those eyes, horrid intent. Anyway, I drove back to my brother's house, and I told him the awful news. Chris is a good man. He's kind, caring, and sensitive. He cried 7 years ago when I rang to tell him that I'd crashed my motorbike and broken my leg. I just want to point that out before I explain what happened next. I have lung cancer, I croaked. My brother was washing the plates, but he stopped abruptly the second I uttered the word cancer. I expected the floodgates to part, much as they had after my motorcycle accident, and there were tears, just not sad ones. On that face, he wore a smile like the one I'd just seen on Dr. Arnold. Are you serious, Josh? Chris half whispered, seeming to hold back a giggle. Yes, I answered slowly. Are you okay? Your face looks... What? How does it look? He asked, tears trickling from his eyes. Gleeful eyes. This is a blessing. I wish I had your gift. It'd make life so much easier. Let me show you. Chris shot across the room at such speed. The orange glow of dusk, coming through the kitchen window, revealed only a little of his giddy lips, overflowing with froth. This rabid thing, once my brother, seized a clump of my hair, then started to thrust my body forwards like a battering ram. Let's get all of that good stuff out of you, shall we? He started to roar as we neared the kitchen sink. It's a blessing from Ralkin. I began to cry. What the fuck are you? His fingers cut my protest short when they rammed down my throat, provoking my gag reflex. Then I threw up more red phlegm in a gushing flow that stained the water and soapy plates beneath my face. With bloodshot eyes and saliva-coated lips, I fearfully pleaded, "Stop." "Oh, it's beautiful," Chris interrupted, swirling his fingers in the bloody muck I just coughed up into the water, just like he said it would be. I noticed it on his wrist. A wound, a red circle cut into his flesh, filled with a gradient of dots, pricked by something sharp. The symbol from the door. I screamed with closed lips as my face was dunked into the water, but I involuntarily choked out a few more drops of blood into the red, the polluted water, which horrifyingly engulfed me. Then Chris dug his fingers more deeply into my hair, hoisted me out of the bloody filth in the sink, and lifted me to eye level with the kitchen window. "Ralkan," my brother whispered. "You're so fortunate." Standing in the near dark of Chris's back garden, barely revealed by the last dregs of red from a setting sun, was something that broadened my petrified eyes. A man, only he didn't look like a man at all. The figure wore a black, hooded trench coat, hiding what one would assume to be a human form, but his face betrayed him. It was covered in tumors, the size of fists. 2 dark pinpricks, eyes, I think, were sitting in tight crannies, squished uncomfortably between the tumors. Those bulbous blobs of green, swollen skin, and his discolored skin grew darker towards the top of his face. The symbol represented this man's deformed face. Suddenly, my giggling, deranged brother slammed my head against the rounded edge of the kitchen counter, and all fell to black. When I woke, I found myself on the kitchen floor of a pitch-black house, and Josh was gone. It's been 7 days, and he hasn't returned. Every morning, my condition worsens. My body weakens. Even lumbering down to the kitchen for food and water is painful. My skin and my bones seem to be withering. Before all of this, on that Tuesday evening after Chris attacked me, I rang Lindsay, the island's ferrywoman. She picked up. Lindsay always picks up. She lives by that old corded phone in her living room. Another thing that she will always do, if one only asks, is take a trip to the mainland, even after the official 3 o'clock voyage. Much like Chris, however, she wasn't herself. "No, Joshua," the old lady hissed near breathlessly from the other end of the landline. "I don't think he would like you to go ashore." She hung up, and she hasn't taken my calls since. I don't have the strength to steal a boat. Certainly don't have the strength to paddle to the mainland. My old friends haven't been picking up the phone. or answering their messages, which is concerning. So now I'm turning to the internet. What do I do? I'm coughing up my fucking lungs. The island's gone insane. I've tried to tell myself that the man in the garden is just some poor, unwell person, unwell like my brother, Lindsay, and Dr. Arnold. Unwell like me, perhaps. But there's more to it than that. Collective hysteria is sweeping across the island. Even the fucking postman slipped some blank envelopes through my letterbox at the weekend. They each bore that circular symbol, smeared in blood. I'm haunted by the toothy smile and waving hand he offered from the other side of the front door's frosted pane. So many questions are whirring through my mind. Do I even have lung cancer? Has somebody done something else to me? I saw Chris in the garden last night, looking up at me. I don't know why he's left me on my own. Please, somebody, comment something. Quickly. Now. Right fucking now. I need help. The support group. My name is David, I say to the circle of gentle, encouraging faces, and I want to be a better person. Hi, David. They respond in unison. Their voices blend perfectly, too perfectly, like a practiced choir. It's my first time at Better Persons Anonymous. The flyer appeared on my windshield 3 days ago. Struggling with who you are. Want to be better? Join us. Wednesdays, 8 p.m. No judgment. No past required. I chose this basement meeting over the court-mandated anger management sessions. The judge gave me a choice. After the incident at my daughter's soccer game, I still maintain that referee was wrong, that he was deliberately targeting Emma. The restraining order was excessive. Carol, the group facilitator, nods at me. Her smile never reaches her eyes. Share your story, David. I stop studying the faces around me. 12 people, evenly spaced in a perfect circle. Their postures mirror each other unconsciously. Or is it unconscious? I lost my temper again. It's been happening more since Susan left. Since she took Emma. Would you say you've always struggled with anger? Carol asks. Her pen hovers over a notepad. But she hasn't written anything all evening. No? Yes. Maybe. I rub my face. It's like there's this other person inside me sometimes, someone I don't recognize. A murmur of understanding ripples through the circle. When I look up, everyone is nodding at exactly the same angle. The first step, Carol says, is recognizing the person you want to be. Close your eyes, David. Picture your ideal self. I comply, feeling slightly foolish. What do you see? I see someone calmer. Someone who didn't make his 8-year-old daughter cry at her soccer game. Someone Susan wouldn't have left. Good. Carol's voice comes from closer now. Hold on to that image. That better person. That better David. Something cold touches my forehead. My eyes snap open. Carol stands directly in front of me, her finger pressed between my eyebrows. The others have risen from their chairs, forming a tighter circle around me. Their faces are still smiling, still gentle, but their eyes are empty. What? I try to stand, but my body won't respond. The treatment has begun, Carol says. Her finger feels like ice against my skin. You want to be a better person, David. We're going to help you. I changed my mind, I managed to say. I'll take the anger management classes. Oh, David. Carol's smile widens impossibly. No one ever changes their mind here. That's the whole point. The others step closer. I notice for the first time that they all have the same posture, the same walk, like puppets moved by the same hand. You see, Carol continues, her icy finger tracing patterns on my forehead. We've perfected the art of becoming better people. We've found that the easiest way to improve someone is to simply replace them. My vision blurs. The room seems to ripple. The human consciousness is surprisingly portable, she explains, like software that can be overwritten. We simply remove the problematic elements, anger, fear, weakness, and install something better, something perfect. You're insane, I whisper, but I can feel it starting, a numbness spreading from where her finger touches my skin, seeping into my thoughts. No, David, we're better, and soon you will be too. She gestures to the circle. Look at your future. Friends, look how calm they are, how perfect. I look, really look, behind their identical smiles. I see it now, the emptiness, the absence of anything real. And in that moment, I understand the true horror. These aren't people who became better. These are people who were erased. The anger you feel right now, Carol says softly, that'll be the first thing to go. Then the fear, then the love. It's surprisingly counterproductive to perfection. Then the memories that make you imperfect. Susan, Emma, all those messy human things. Please, I beg, feeling my thoughts begin to fade. My daughter will have a much better father, Carol finishes, one who never loses his temper, one who smiles and nods and agrees, one who's perfect. The numbness reaches my memories. I see Emma's face beginning to blur, like a photograph left in the sun. Who? I struggle to hold on to myself. Who are you? Carol's smile finally reaches her eyes, and I wish it hadn't. Behind her practiced expression, I see something ancient, something that watched humans struggle with their imperfections for eons and decided to help in the worst possible way. We are the better ones, she says. We've been improving people for a very long time. Slowly, carefully, one support group at a time. My vision darkens at the edges. The last thing I see is my reflection in the window. My face, already beginning to smooth into that same peaceful expression all the others wear. My last human thought is of Emma, and I try to scream. But better people don't scream. Better people smile. Better people nod. Better people agree. Welcome, Carol says to the thing that used to be David, to your better self. The circle is complete again. 13 perfect smiles. 13 empty gazes. 13 better people. Outside, more flyers flutter in the wind, carried to more windshields, more doorsteps, more desperate people seeking improvement. After all, everyone wants to be a better person, and the better ones are always happy to help. Always. 5 years ago, my dad passed, leaving me some strange tapes. I finally found where they came from. I've meant to update things a few times over the last 5 years, but work and life just keep getting in the way. Sorry about that. In my defense, I've been going through a lot and keeping all of you safe in the process. Honestly, I probably wouldn't have done any updates if I hadn't seen so much activity on here recently. The past few months have had a major uptick in veil activity, especially on this very forum. From someone's account of a horseman of the apocalypse ending the world to a supposed time traveler, we all got a good laugh out of that one. Warning everyone about the end. I promise there's no apocalypse heading our way. We're making sure of that. Sorry, probably should make things a little easier to understand. If you're only seeing this post, check back on my original from 5 years ago. My dad died around the beginning of 2020, leaving plenty of unresolved childhood trauma for me to work through. Therapy's been helpful for that, but I'm not going to get into those sessions here. No, everyone was more interested in the box of tapes he left me, reel after reel of emergency alert broadcasts that showed the end of dimensions just like our own. Parallel universes blinking out thanks to aberrations taking over. Watching them, well, it took a toll on me for a while. Things were bleak, but I finally took my dad's advice and went on a search for where they came from. Search makes it seem like it took a lot of effort. I promise, if you want to find the collective, you won't. They find you. Fast, too. I had barely packed when a couple of men in black wannabes were at my doorstep. Guess I can't be too surprised, since Dad used to work for them. Turns out there's some hereditary factor to seeing aberrations, and yours truly won the genetic lottery. They did the usual secret police stuff, blindfold me and take me elsewhere, some undisclosed location in the deep south. I'll be honest, I thought I was going to get 2 in the back of the head and tossed into the swamps for a few minutes there, even though I knew who they were. Think it's because I knew who they were that I thought I would die, actually. They're pretty lax about whistleblowers, thanks to just how batshit everything we deal with is. But I didn't know at the time. Hell, the old posts are still up, and I'm allowed to write these out to, in the words of my superior officers, blow off steam, because nobody is going to fucking believe me anyway. Honestly, it's freeing. I dealt with HIPAA for a healthcare job while I was still in college, and this place is much more relaxed than that. Anyway, neither here nor there. They transported me, KGB style, to a base the collective has down in the south, and there was a welcoming committee of one guy. He was nice enough, older, kind smile, said his name was Ronald, not even joking. This was more like a corporate job orientation than anything else, and thinking back, it's almost comical how laid back everything was. He even made sure to tell me about the dental benefits, and that's more than any job would have given me with my doctorate's degree. To put things bluntly, the collective monitors something called the veil in our world. The veil protects us, keeps everything separate from other realities that can get really weird and really dangerous depending on what goes down. The veil makes sure that it doesn't spill over into other realities, usually anyway. Sometimes, depending on the severity of what goes down in other realities, tears can form in the veil. That's when we have a problem. Tears have to be stitched up as soon as they happen. Otherwise, the shit happening backstage spills out into a very unwitting audience. According to Ronald, there was a pretty high uptick in tears that started about a year before Dad died. Guess I know what made his heart finally give out. Essentially, there are 2 divisions to the collective that prevent apocalyptic events from spilling over into our reality. The first is the observation division. which is where I ended up stationed. We keep an eye on everything beyond the veil, all the other parallel universes out there, and use that to help predict where things could go wrong, essentially stopping them before they get a chance to take hold on home turf. The intervention division monitors our own side of the veil. They have cognizance set up on 24/7 monitors, looking all over our world to make sure that when and if any tiers open up, we can have agents on the ground to fix it as soon as possible. I'm not even going to try to explain how they close the tiers back up, because that's something well beyond my pay grade, but they stitch it back like professional seamsters and keep the rest of you none the wiser. Now, when it comes to this forum, we've been seeing a lot of posts pop up from other parallel dimensions, which is odd considering it's a digital platform. Usually, analog is the only way to observe or record anything that comes through the veil. So posts over the internet are definitely something new that we're still figuring out how to deal with. For example, a couple of months ago, there was a post that made it surprisingly high. Thankfully, most everyone thought it was a work of fiction, perks of the game, I guess, and disregarded it. It was a direct eyewitness account of the biblical apocalypse. I mean, big B biblical, four horsemen, Book of Revelations level shit, heartbreaking to read, considering it ended with the witness committing suicide to avoid being taken, but it gave us the heads up we need to figure out something bad was on the way. Thanks to that post, we were able to stop an aberration that would have wiped 90% of the Earth in one day. Then we get weird shit like the New Year's Eve 2024 incident. Guy claimed to be a time traveler, coming back to warn us about the impending tears that were popping up all over the veil in his timeline before he blew the brains out of his childhood self and his parents. Thankfully, the collective found him before he was able to get through the door of his childhood home. Look, I don't know how the collective in his universe operated, but holy shit, were they bad at their jobs. Fuckers sent a man through a tier like it was going to send him back in time. Idiots should have known time travel doesn't work that way. And that tier just sent him to a whole different dimension. Ours. Yeah, his warning would have gone nowhere, because we were already on the anomaly that caused all those tears in the first place. Unlike his collective, what a catastrophic failure that was. Not to mention how it endangered countless other universes, along with his own. Fun, or not so fun, fact, we did an observation on his dimension not long after apprehending him. That shit is gone. I mean gone, like wiped from the fabric of reality. They really fucked up. All thanks to the work of us in the observation division. And those that came before us, we're still here safe. I know humans have been doing a good job of fucking up their own lately. But trust me, compared to some of the shit that the collective has taken out of play in the past few decades, we've gotten off lucky. Ronald gave me access to all of Dad's old case files when I started here too. Said to think about it like a kind of signing bonus that would help me learn more about him, I guess. Let me tell you, what he snuck out on those VHS tapes was enough to desensitize me to a lot, but what was still in here was, damn, it was something I never expected. Seeing a spider god emerge and nuclear zombies devastate everything was nothing. All right, I'm going to stop my ramblings about what I've been through. If anyone wants more information about the collective, I can easily answer questions. Like I said, they don't give a shit who talks, because it's not like anyone is going to take this seriously in the first place. I've got case files to share, though some of Dad's, some from the people before him, and some from my own cases that I've worked on. Like I said, I've been really busy since taking up a job here, and in between delving into his old stuff, trying to find out who the man that barely raised me really was. I've had my own fair share of brushes with the strange and deadly. Enough yapping. I know what you're here for. The coffin Earth. Designation 389994. Case file of Jeremiah. Redacted 13/1981. Intercepted some concerning news. Broadcasts from Earth 38994 yesterday. That universe got ahead of the space race in a big way, with America beating the Soviets by over a decade and branching out with privatized aerospace contracts in the ensuing years. Since then, it's been a mad frenzy for them, with everyone trying to work on space projects. One company is building a huge base on the moon to find out what lies beneath. Another is customizing space stations for the rich and famous to hide away in the event Earth ends up going to hell. The one we need to keep an eye on, though, is Avarice Corporation. I haven't been able to find an analogous company here for them, but they're huge over there and trying to figure out faster than light travel. News broadcast is touting that they'll be launching their first test flight of a special nuclear fission engine later tonight. Even found a way to broadcast what they see, though there's not going to be any way to get a signal until they're out of FTL speed. Agatha is backing me on this one. She's been doing her usual thing and saying dark, cryptic things. Ever since the spider incident a few years ago, she's been in rough shape, but I don't think anything's spooked her this bad since. We're having a little watch party later on. Her words in the meantime make me want to jump into a fire just to get rid of the cold chill they gave me. Everyone thinks outrunning the sun is a good idea until they find out the darkness is faster. 12/14/1981 test flight unsuccessful. The ship took off around noon Eastern time, and judging by the broadcast that was being sent from the ship, actually made it to their destination. Simple enough. They were just supposed to hop to the edge of the Milky Way, then make the return flight. Broadcast came in almost right on time, though it's not like you could see a whole lot. There was vague light from some stars, but mostly it was just the dark void of empty space. Then this, I swore. For a minute some cheap sci-fi movie cut in. It looked like this huge, carved stone coffin floating right by the camera. Bright chains wrapping all around it, reflecting any light that dared get too close with their shiny links. This thing had to be bigger than a planet. It was obviously some distance from the ship, but we only saw it for a few minutes before the signal was lost again, seemingly jumping to FTL speed and losing the broadcast. It stayed out for about 2 minutes. Agatha and I were about to cut the feed, figuring that was it, and our worries were unfounded. Maybe the people on board had some kind of sense about them and turned around instead of investigating whatever that thing was. Feed came back though, and I don't think I felt my stomach drop this bad since the Heaven incursion on Earth 84778 a couple of years ago. The camera was reeling through empty space, spinning around so that nothing stayed in frame for more than a few seconds, but luckily not with fast enough velocity that everything was incomprehensible. Debris was everywhere, making it hard to see through it all, but then, well, we saw the chains floating free, links broken. I assume they aimed right at the coffin, and dialed the FTL engine to the max, hitting it head on to break it open. We're on edge, watching from here. The camera rotation kept revealing what was happening, piece by piece. First, we saw the massive slab holding the coffin shut start to lift, a long, blackened hand extending to push it up further. As it opened further, stars in the background began to blink out, one by one. The thing that emerged was a manifestation of darkness, night made physical. It was huge, dark wings sprouting from its back, and no definable features on its skin. It looked humanoid, though with tendrils of darkness wrapped around it. It was kind of hard to tell. As it rose from the coffin, it seemed to begin absorbing any light that came near it, sucking it in like a black hole, singularity blazing against its skin, absorbing any energy it saw. The camera eventually flew towards it, getting sucked into the darkness and losing broadcast signal. That was enough to let us know this world was a lost cause. Whatever this thing was, there's no way that humanity could put those chains back. We'll continue observation for the coming days, but, well, it was broadcast on international television there, so they're already in rough shape. 1981 notice to all collective personnel and contractors. Going forward, there is a moratorium on the study of light speed, or faster than light travel in any form. Even theoretical physics pertaining to light speed travel are prohibited until we can figure out what this thing is and ensure it doesn't exist on our side of the veil. Thank you for your understanding. Jeremiah 2:16, 1981A's expected. Things aren't going well for that version of Earth. Not long after the broadcast aired, people started taking to the streets, demanding to know who greenlit the project, going after government officials and the CEO of Avarice to hold them to justice for dooming humanity. Meanwhile, space telescopes and satellites on the far side of the Milky Way were sending back images of a galaxy that was becoming less and less crowded of stars by the moment. Everything that could give off light, from stars to small clusters of radiation and space dust, were slowly absorbed into, well, whatever the hell that thing was. Agatha named it the Night Emperor. Sounds like a Conan villain, in my opinion, but I'll let her stick with naming things. Feels wrong to give whatever this thing was a name that sounds like a comic villain when it's about to slaughter an entire universe. News broadcasts are giving hourly updates on information they get, including new pictures, and at one point, a live video feed from a space telescope that was launched a few years ago. The Night Emperor, as of 1600 hours Eastern Time Zone here, has successfully absorbed every star and a nebula it's crossed, and is now just outside the orbital track of Neptune. Judging by the rate it's going, it will reach Earth within the next day. Humanity is taking it about as well as to be expected. Some have splintered into cult factions that are offering up politicians, scientists, and other figures to the Night Emperor in an attempt to broker peace. Unfortunately for them, this thing just doesn't care. It seems to only have the motivation to spread darkness where it goes. I would like to note that the darkness that follows it doesn't only emanate from it, but grows, spreading like a corruption over all it touches. I can't say for sure that anything it absorbs is necessarily destroyed, so much as it is just swallowed and left in an eternal state of night, as no light seems capable of penetrating this dark. 1981 Agatha posited that the Night Emperor would not stop at Earth. I fear she was correct. Upon reaching the orbital path of Earth early this morning, I fully expected the being to stop. Perhaps I've been reading too many pulp stories. In their reality, though, the Night Emperor is as uncaring for life as the darkness it brings. Earth was an afterthought to it, simply passing by with little care. News stations set up outside to get a view of it as it passed, and the footage is something that will stay with me forever. In broad daylight, this thing just passes by, larger than Earth itself. The face could be clearly seen as it passed, pure darkness for the most part, with no mouth to speak of, but one massive, bulging white eye right in the middle. I can't help but be reminded of the Greek myth of Erebus, the god of primordial darkness. Even before Earth and the sun, there was the darkness that man would come to fear, for no other reason than the unknown that lurks within it. It passed by Earth, and the darkness began to spread across the land not long after. Reports flooded in of people going out during bright daylight, only to be attacked brutally by their own shadows, unable to fight back as their own darkness fought its way in. A reporter doing an outdoors segment when the Night Emperor passed by watched in horror, recorded live for everyone to see as her shadow unstuck itself from the pavement in the daylight. It just grew from the sidewalk, the air popping as it lengthens in the bright sunlight. The Night Emperor leaving it behind as it continued on toward the great star that brought us all life. Then it grabbed the reporter, one long hand on either side of her head, spindly fingers reaching into her mouth as it tore her jaw from her skull, ducking into her now eternally screaming mouth and forcing its entire being down into her body. Tendrils swirled around her, dark shadows breaking through her skin as it settled into its new home, before she began attacking the others around her. The rest of the day followed much the same, with others falling victim to their own shades. In quick succession, the shadows that took over then would lend their help to others so they could get their own skin suits. Darkness invading everyone. No amount of light could stop it. Not since the Night Emperor was free. The last broadcast that came through was from a station still holding out somehow. They were staying in shade, and they theorized that was able to camouflage them from their own shadows long enough to get the final moments of Earth on analog. The Night Emperor, still massive in the sky, floated ever closer to the sun, the center of all life, and simply absorbed it. One moment it was there, the next it had been taken into the Night Emperor, plunging everything in the universe into eternal darkness. There was a brief cacophony of screams on the broadcast before the fluorescent lights in the studio revealed shadows coming in from every crack outside as frost began to quickly form everywhere. Earth 38994 has officially been deemed a lost cause as of 2000 hours Eastern Standard Time. It's recommended that the moratorium on light speed and faster than light travel continue until further notice, barring any confirmation of the Night Emperor's casket in our universe.